בחרמון נמס השלג בחצי הלילה, בחרמון זורם לו פלג בחצי הליל, אבא שם על הר השלג בחצי הלילה, שר שירים על נס בפלא עם כל ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. בבקעת תמר פורח בחצי הלילה, הירח שם זורח בחצי הליל, שם אחי ודאי שומע בחצי הלילה את שירנו השמח כאן בישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. במדבר הולך החושך בחצי הלילה, שקט הס בארץ גושן בחצי הליל, לדודי עיני נחושת בחצי הלילה, וגם הוא חוגג כמו שכל בית ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. ואני יושב בבית בחצי הלילה, עם נרות וגביע יין בחצי הליל, וכוכב מאיר עיניים בחצי הלילה, לי מוסר ברכת שמיים ולכל ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. שוב צוהל.
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались з кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння, різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар.
Future
Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1008 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again as the Russian ruble is once again turning into ruble yet again, and it's gone into a free fall. An emergency stop has been put in place, and that thing is collapsed. And also, we are seeing that Putin is placing the Satan II nukes on combat alert, and he's really saber-rattling today, and it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world today, as we've been able to get major information from every corner of the globe, specifically the Middle East as well as Ukraine, on major news events that have been going on over the past 24 hours. We've been able to hear that inside of the Russian Federation, the ruble has quite literally gone into an unmitigated free fall, as ruble has now gone to about 113 rubles on the dollar, the most devalued level that the Russian ruble has ever been at in its history since the creation of the Russian Federation in 1991, and the Russian Federation has now taken another emergency wartime act, completely pausing currency trading on the ruble until the beginning of next year in 2025. At the exact same time, we've also been able to hear that the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, has declared that the Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles of the variety Satan II are to be put on high alert and standby for further orders. We also understand that this is a continuation of the Russian nuclear threats and rhetoric that has been made in the past, but we have been able to get reassurances today from the government of the United States of America that they believe that these nuclear threats are largely nothing more than hot air still. And while the threats are incredibly serious sounding, it does seem as though the United States intelligence is very assured that there is no real threat to the nuclear threats, at least at the moment. However, it does seem as though many countries are considering Russia to be a threat at an entirely different different way, especially inside of the European continent, as we were able to hear that the Germans are considering bringing forward an invocation of Article 5 for the covert forms of espionage that the Russian Federation has been conducting against Western nations, their critical infrastructure, and also their war industry abilities. We are hearing that is mostly a rumor at this point, but still being brought up by top officials of the German government, at least at this time. Meanwhile, outside of the periphery of the Ukraine war is progressing in an incredibly interesting way, to say the least. We were finally able to get footage and exact information and details today about where the magical attack-em strike that occurred about 3 days ago at this point actually happened, which was just to the direct east of Kursk at the Kalino military airbase. From the information that we have at the moment, it does appear that the airbase has suffered significant damage, with the attack-ems targeting and destroying, crazily enough, the air defense systems that were supposed to keep the skies over Kursk safe. It appears that attack was successful, and at least the radar systems of those S-400s was destroyed in the strike. We were also able to get picture and video evidence today of the attack-ems missile remnants that are still scattered around the entirety of the airbase, and it does appear that the Russian Federation will most likely be making some sort of a further IRBM strike against Ukraine in response for the attack at Kalino airfield. Meanwhile, the Russian Federation is still continuing its attacks across the entirety of the point of contact inside of the Kursk Oblast, attempting to push the Ukrainians out of the area of Suja and once again reclaim the entirety of the Russian Federation's land directly along the Ukrainian border in the name of the Russian Federation. It appears that these results have been entirely unsuccessful today, as more prisoners have been taken from the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade of the Russian Federation's armed forces, and we have been able to get a decent amount of video and picture evidence, largely confirming the losses of more Russian Federation armed forces and the attempted pushes from Bolshoi Salatskoy and from the direction of Kromsky-Biki. At the exact same time, we've also been able to hear a major frontline action once again occurring through most areas, but oddly enough, most of it is actually Ukrainian counterattack activity and not Russian offensive activity. It appears that the Ukrainians, at least in the short time, are taking advantage of some Russian disorientation and disorganization amongst the armed forces and are beginning to conduct limited counterattacks to re-secure their frontline positions and possibly re-secure dominating heights in certain areas of the battlefield to be able to prepare for the next wave of Russian offensives that may be coming at least from Seversk and down towards Pokrovsk in the meantime. Crazily enough, right after the ceasefire was declared inside the Middle East, we have now been able to hear that Hezbollah has immediately broken the ceasefire in less than about 18 hours or so, as Israeli air raid sirens began to sound throughout the entirety of northern Israel. Hezbollah missiles once again back on their way into the upper Galilee region, and once again showing that the ceasefire was an incredibly short-lived one, and it does appear that Israeli ground operations along with Hezbollah air operations against the Israelis will be continuing far on into the future. But that's not all that has happened in the Middle East today, as many people who are paying attention to our map may realize that there has been a new front line that has been marked at the moment inside of Syria, as we are now actually going to be bringing forward a very short segment. We do not know how permanent this will be, but it appears that the Syrian civil war has finally kicked off in major form for the first time in 4 years. In fact, for the first time in the entirety of this decade. And we were able to see that today, American-backed or forces backed by the Republic of the United States of America, the Syrian Democratic Forces, have now begun a major offensive today against the Russians and the Bashar al-Assad regime towards the city of Aleppo. There has been a great deal of video and picture evidence, at least two pieces that we put on the news tonight, that is showing that Russian and Syrian government forces are now retreating from the outskirts of Aleppo, and it does appear that the second battle of Aleppo will begin again here in 2024, as Syrian Democratic Forces are now beginning a rapid advance towards the city of Aleppo itself, most likely to recapture the city. But we have loads and loads of news, and these are some of the bigger hot topics tonight, but there are dozens of little clips and little pieces of info that we have not even been able to get into at this point. But we have an insane...
I tell you, Enforcer, some of the biggest news I've been hearing today out of all of our different stories, one common theme here that appears to be ramping up quite a bit is the NATO versus Russia war talk that apparently is getting ramped up by Germany, the UK. Putin's obviously always ramping it up. He's always saber-rattling 24/7. But between all these different escalations in these countries saying these things about war in the future, that is certainly something to watch. And honestly, today's probably been the biggest day of statements of escalation that I've probably seen in a long time.
And it certainly has been from really every single side, and it does appear that conflict, while still seeming largely not possible, is getting closer and closer to maybe becoming a slight possibility. But moving on into the major news that we were able to get today, that is going to be taking us into the city of Moscow, because many of y'all will know that yesterday it was one of the more interesting topics of the stream that the Russian ruble appeared to have been spiraling out of control, at least from what we could see at the time. And yesterday's ruble currency evaluation didn't really look that good, because the ruble had reached about 108 rubles per dollar, which is the most devalued the Russian currency had ever been as of yesterday, and it appeared that the 3.6% inflation rate was about as bad as it's ever gotten in a single 24-hour period as well. Well, then today happened, and it appears that the Russian ruble has quite literally gone insane, and inflation is skyrocketing, as we are now able to see that the ruble is now being exchanged at 113 rubles per American dollar. This is the most devalued that the Russian currency has ever been at in its entire history. And many people would be
also, Enforcer, what's worse than that is that figure you just showed of 107 rubles per $1 US, and this figure right here of 113. That happened over the course of less than 24 hours. That was rapid devaluation, causing the Russians to panic, because the jump between 107 and 113, that is no small jump. That's a very large jump, and it was very fast, indicating that the devaluation was about to take off at a hyper pace, which Russia had to stop. And I think you have that news as well about the central bank stopping it as well.
Yes, we do, and we're actually going to be getting to that here in just a second. But as many of y'all can see, and I actually want to go show y'all this because this would be a very interesting thing to show y'all, USD to ruble. And so there we go. Oh, the 1 month picture is not looking that great for them. I'm going to be entirely honest with y'all. It's looking quite bad. But if we were to go back over the course of a year, it looks even worse. And then if we were to go back over the course of 5 years, it looks tremendously worse. Because let me explain something really quickly. The ruble, before the war in Ukraine began in full through 2020 to 2021 and 2022 in the very early months, was around 72 rubles per American dollar. Then the war began, and the currency briefly skyrocketed to 134 rubles per US dollar, and then it rapidly dropped due to the government in Russia cooking the books for the large part financially to about 58 rubles per US dollar, making it look like the Russian economy actually was doing far better in the war than it was before the war. But nevertheless, they have not been able to keep that illusion up for long, as the ruble has slowly been climbing to being pretty much worthless compared to any other time in Russian Federation's history, or in the Russian Federation's history. As you can see here, the original value of the ruble in 2004, which was 28 rubles per US dollar, meaning that about $1 could get you about a quarter worth of a ruble at the time, to now we're seeing that just in the past few days, it's skyrocketed to 113.15. And this isn't a temporary spike like we were seeing with the beginning of the war in Ukraine. This appears to be something that is spiraling out of control quite rapidly. And it appears to be such a bad situation that the Russian Federation central government, seeing that it's starting to go into rapid hyperinflation, has now completely shut down any trade on the Russian ruble. According to the information that we have, the Russian central bank halted all trading on the ruble until 2025. And this is due to the ruble's devaluation rapidly accelerated this morning, which caused fears of a currency collapse in the Russian Federation, which would of course create an economic collapse. And this is starting to show us that the Russian economy is incredibly weak, probably even on its last legs at this point. This isn't the
also, Enforcer, what that tells us as well, from what I saw earlier today, and also based on how fast that devalued the currency in less than 24 hours, the Russian central bank, as pitifully informed as they are about their own economy, they realized that unless they stepped in and halted trading until 2025, that is, until next year in January at least, they're halting all trading on their currency. They realized that if they did not step in and fix the situation, or at least just try to stave it off temporarily, that currency was about to go into hyper devaluation, and it was about to go to rock bottom like the world's never seen before. So the fact that they had to do that, that's like unprecedented, stopping the trading of an entire currency like that, and basically till the end of the year, which is about a month and a half away. That's wild to me.
It really is wild, I think, to everyone, and it really is starting to show how bad off the Russian Federation's economy is, because while they are stopping trading on the ruble, that does not stop the continued hyperinflation of the ruble from this point. It kind of helps to tamp it down a little bit, but it does not completely remove the ability for the ruble to continue to skyrocket in worthlessness for the large part, like we're seeing right now. We are expecting that while the ruble's inflation rate may slow down a little bit, it is going to continue to skyrocket well on into the future. We'll probably even see that in some scenarios that we're considering, that it may start to go into hyperinflation, kind of like the Venezuelan bolivar, which also went into rapid amounts of hyperinflation as well. So going off of that, we are assuming that the Russian Federation's economy is most likely going to collapse. And we have gotten rumors today, we didn't put this on the map, but we have gotten rumors that some of the last major real estate developers that did not collapse in the past few weeks are about to be collapsing very soon, and possibly having to file for bankruptcy due to a complete collapse of their business and a failure to be able to take on the massive losses that they've been sustaining for quite some time at this point, given the state of the Russian Federation's economy. With this in mind, and considering that the real estate sector of a economy is usually one of the major heartbeats, considering that people have to have places to live, and usually that's a fairly decent sort of a commodity, well, not really a commodity, but a sort of an item to buy and trade, it seems as though Russia may be truly going down the line of pretty much a complete economic collapse. I'm trying to figure out how to put that, because it sounds like we're saying that Russia is going to turn into Mad Max land if we say a complete economic collapse, but that really does appear to be the case. It looks as though they are about to go into a major economic depression. If that does happen, things are going to be going absolutely insane inside of the Russian Federation. There will most likely be major amounts of food shortages. There will probably be a major amount of lawlessness inside the country. We already know that the Russian bureaucracies, such as the Ministry of Internal Affairs, is short-staffed by 25%. Things are not going well at this moment at any level inside of Russia, and once an economic collapse does set in, things are going to be getting entirely worse. We actually do expect, however, that if the Russian economy does collapse, one thing that is going to be getting better is the current situation of the war in Ukraine, as the Russian Federation will most likely be tied up with internal issues so heavily they really will not have an ability to continue to focus on the war. This generally will allow Ukraine to make major offensive gains on the front lines. We will also probably see that the Russian Federation's armed forces may even withdraw, as keeping them deployed inside of Ukraine would be so prohibitively expensive at that point, and considering that the government wouldn't really have a lot of money to work with, they probably may end up withdrawing a large amount of their forces from Ukraine, or completely give it up entirely if the economic collapse inside of Russia is to get incredibly severe. Once again, these are all hypotheticals, however. We're giving all these hypotheticals based off of the fact that the Russian economy is quite literally collapsing before our very eyes as of the past 2 days, and it does look like that's not going to be really slowing down or stopping anytime soon. And while the Russian economy is collapsing, it appears that Putin is also going through an absolute collapse as well, and realizing that the Ukraine war really has to be ramped up to 10 while it even exists, because if the Russian Federation's government continues to wait much longer, they may not have a government or a federation to be in charge of here in the near future due to a complete lack of any kind of tax base or any kind of income. And we have been able to hear today that Putin has put the nuclear forces, the Satan II missiles, on high alert. The Satan II sounds like a really dangerous missile, specifically because it's called Satan, which, you know, kind of seems a little bit reasonable, but nevertheless, the Satan missile, at least from what I can find, to let y'all know, just to lower any fears here that y'all may have, it's the famous Sarmat, which is the one that's blown up in just about every single test launch since the beginning of its life. Just for y'all to remember. That's not really that big of a threat. It's a wonderful thing to know, though, because it pretty much lets us know there's no reason to be afraid, because you see, the Sarmat sucks. Like, just to make this as simple as possible, we just watched one blow up an entire launch pad. I think it was about 3 months ago. So, considering that that is the case, and considering that the Sarmat blows, quite literally, there is no reason to really be that concerned about these being put on high alert. Because if they are put on high alert, and then they are to be fired, we have a feeling they probably have a much higher chance of blowing up on the pad or right above the pad than they ever do reaching all the way to the United States or any other country that would be a target of an RS-28 or a Sarmat, or a Satan II as they're called here by their NATO designation. Either way, I do have to say, though, it is quite comical that their serious threat is to say we are going to put the missile that sucks the most on high alert to be ready to fire. It's like, that's like saying over here, like, we're going to take our crappiest Honda Civic and we're going to get that ready to make an emergency ambulance run to the hospital for this patient that's about to die. It's like, that is something that really doesn't mean a lot, because it's like that Honda Civic right there, no disrespect to Honda Civics, by the way, because they are absolute troopers, but that Honda Civic's going to break down before it even makes it to the hospital. This isn't really like putting a lot of faith into anything or credit into anything like that. This is the worst missile that we've ever seen made. There are literally...
also when this thing was being developed, it was plagued with problems. They kept having to put off the actual service date of the thing because it was like so bad in development that they had to keep tweaking it and fixing it and doing things to try to make it work because it simply wouldn't work. And when it finally went into service, I think in September of 2023, which was last year, they put it into service, and every single test since, like the enforcer said, has been explosion after explosion, and they can't seem to get the thing to work quite right. So maybe they suddenly got them working out of the blue. I don't know, but I will say if the thing actually works, it can carry, I think, up to like 10 warheads individually, up to 750 kilotons, which is a hell of a yield. And also, it's one of the longest range nuclear missiles that is currently in service anywhere around the world. They can simply get it to work. That's the key, though. If it won't fire and it keeps blowing up, that's not going to do them any good.
It's not going to do them any good at all. And it's something to say, and we got to get this out there a lot, that this thing has failed more than it's ever succeeded. And that's something that a lot of people do not know when they do not pay attention to this whole deal. Let me see if I can actually get y'all some pictures of the Plesetsk explosion that happened, because the explosion happened at the Plesetsk launch facility. And let me see if I can find, and you know what, let me go pull up a, let's see, an RS-28 failure, because there should be pictures out there still showing the absolute critical damage that was caused by the Sarmat literally blowing up. So here we go. There it is. This is the last time that they attempted to launch one of these. You can see the massive crater right there. And this picture doesn't even really give the crater's size justice, because this thing was absolutely tremendous. It started wildfires in the entire surrounding area because of its explosion. You can actually see it a little bit more up close here. These are large-scale Ural 4320 sized fire trucks over here to the upper right side of the screen that you're seeing. This crater was measured, from what we can tell, to be about 150 feet wide and about 80 to 90 feet deep, meaning that this thing is such a large crater, it actually would contend to be one of the largest man-made craters if this was one that was made in World War I. That is really crazy when you think about it, but still, it is showing us that the RS-28 Sarmats are not really doing that well. There's not a lot of them. They've really never been tested successfully, and you can even see right here, if you want to pull this up, because we have been able to check this and confirm this, because the RS-28 has been in development and put into service while we've been covering the news here on this channel, so we've covered this story the entire way, piece by piece. The RS-28 Sarmat was put into service before it was even known to have a decent chance of succeeding with every launch. It was put into service and rushed into service in early 2023, and since then, they've still been trying to conduct test launches of the missile to assess if it even is really airworthy or if it will even work at all. And every single time they've tried since then, every single one of them has been a failure, from what we understand. So going
also, when did they even start production of the thing? Like when was the first like known development of this Sarmat? Because that was a long time in development for it to still be failing.
Interestingly enough, like if we want to go through the story here, just to make sure that we have it all correct, because Wikipedia does have the timestamps correct. In 2014, during the Donbass and Crimea situation, the Russians said that they were going to have a Sarmat ready for deployment in 2020. Remember that date, everyone. So in 2014, another source suggested the program was being accelerated, and it would constitute 100% of Russia's fixed land-based nuclear arsenal by 2021. So remember that date, everyone. They're going to put the Sarmat into service in 2020, and then it's going to replace every single Russian nuke in service right now that's a land-based system by 2021. So in 2015, it was reported that the production schedule for the first prototype of the Sarmat was beginning to slip away, and they expected the first one to become operational in 2016. In 2016, The first Sarmat was not operational, and they only tested the first stage, already showing that they're way behind schedule. In 2017, a year after that, prototype missiles had been built and delivered to the Plesetsk Cosmodrome for trials, and the test program was delayed to recheck the key hardware components before the initial launch, once again showing that there were some major issues. Moving on from that, in December of 2017, the first successful launch test of the missile was carried out, and according to the information that we have, the missile flew several dozen kilometers and fell within the test range. Once again, showing that this isn't really a full test of the system. It's really more so of a half-baked test, because there's no way to test the first and second stage with such a short range of several dozen kilometers, and also being so, I guess you could say, light in altitude, being so low to the ground still, that most of it ended up landing in the test range. In 2018, Putin then stated that the active phase of tests of the missiles had finally begun, and shortly after, there was an anonymous source that leaked information to the U.S. deliberately about the missile to get the United States scared, and then they also published a video showing a second successful test launch at the Cosmodrome, but once again, only at the first stage. We've never seen the second stage operational, and this is a two-stage missile. In 2019, they did an exhibition of the weapon system at the National Defense Management Center, and they talked about how great the missile was and how incredible it was and everything. But moving on from that, they then said that after the test on the 22nd of May in 2021, once again, it was supposed to have already been in service a year ago at this point, that they would soon be combat ready and maybe finally be put into service. Then it took an entire 2 years beyond that statement in 2022, and on the 22nd of May, and finally on the 18th of February of this year, they claimed that they were able to conduct another test of the missile. The Russians then shut up immediately about it because it ended up being a failure and the missile ended up exploding above the pad. So then the United States said, from what we can tell, it's a failure. And then the Russians said, we have no comment, letting us know that it did blow up and it was a complete failure. And then after that, on the 1st of September of last year, the Roscosmos director said that it was finally in official combat duty. 3 years after the Russians actually said it would be put into service at all. So they're already 3 years behind schedule. None of them have really succeeded at being launched beyond the first stage, and even then, that's a bit of a if it even launches off the pad at that point. And then finally, on the 22nd of September, this was the last test launch, the actual entire missile blew up at the launch pad, completely destroying it, which were the pictures I showed you all a second ago. So going off of that, I would have to say I do not really have that much fear about the RS-28 Sarmats being put on high alert. The chances are it'll blow up the Russians before it blows us up, at least based off of its current, I guess you could say, running track record off of what we know publicly, which is pretty decent information. But nevertheless, moving on from that, it seems as though the only thing that isn't going to be blowing up on the Russians is going to be a Sarmat, because it looks as though the economy is going to explode in the Russians' faces before a Sarmat ever does when they try and attempt to launch it again. And it does seem as though that a lot of people are believing that this emergency measure that the Russian Federation has put in place to completely halt currency trading is showing that the Russian ruble is hyper devaluing and that the economy is most likely going to collapse. And what are a lot of people thinking about that, Matthew? And what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so in this question right here, what do you think was actually happening to the ruble, causing the Russian bank to put an emergency halt on the trading of their own currency? So 75% said the ruble was hyper devaluing, and it was right on the cusp of actually doing that hyper devaluation, while 9% said it seems like overhyped news, and 7% said it was just a precaution for safety. And this was certainly something that was unprecedented. We've not really seen this in modern history, an entire currency being put on halt because they're worried about the thing going into hyperinflation or devaluation, whichever one you want to call it. So I would say that I'm definitely with the 75%. If the Russian bank had not put that halt on it today, just like everybody has been guessing, that currency would have gone basically collapsing completely all the way if they wouldn't have put that halt on it. So, you know, it's not just a precaution, it's much more than that. It was basically a last-ditch effort to save their own currency before they eventually caused so much panic in the Russian civilian population that they had another massive run on the banks. And of course, when that happens, that's when you have real banks collapsing, and then you have a complete economic collapse, which would be devastating to the Russian Federation, and they can't afford that. So, Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say the ruble was about to go into hyper devaluation. Just over the past 24 hours, the ruble has skyrocketed to insane heights in devaluation. And it was showing us that if the Russian Federation continued to allow the ruble to completely spiral out of control, hyperdeflation was going to be setting in. Well, hyperinflation actually was going to be setting in. And therefore, the Russian Federation was going to be in some very serious trouble. With that in mind, I would have to say also, given the act that the Russians have shut down all currency trading for the remainder of the year on the ruble, I would have to say that it is without a question, without a doubt, a bad sign of things to come in Russia. The Russian Federation's government does not shut down currency trading for no reason. That is showing that the currency was going so out of control, and they've taken a measure that's never really been seen in any economy in the modern day at any time. I personally cannot think of a single time recently where I've heard that a country has completely shut down trading on their currency. Actually, Matthew, do we have any information on that? Let me go see. Times countries have stopped trading on their currency. Let's see if there's any other times. Let's see here. What country stopped? Let's see. I
wouldn't be shocked if it's never happened before, because I've honestly never heard of it. I don't really study economics of countries on their currencies that closely. I do have a working knowledge of it, but I'd be shocked if it's ever happened before.
Man, you know what's the best article, though, that I've seen trying to pull this up? I can't find any answer to it really quickly, but this one from CNN. New U.S. sanctions force the end of the dollar and euro trading on Russian markets. And it's from June of this year, and it says, new U.S. sanctions against Russia have caused an immediate suspension of trading in dollars and euros on the country's leading financial marketplace. And let me see here really quickly. Let's see. I'm trying to see here. Oh, look at that. It said, actually, according to the Russians, from what I'm seeing here in the CNN article, they said that this would actually do their economy much better because the dollar and euro was, in fact, an incredibly weak and dying currency, and the ruble is just simply stronger and built different than the dollar and the euro. I guess that didn't really age well just 6 months later at this point, when the ruble started going so out of control they got to stop trading on it. I guess that shows that the ruble truly is built different. It's built like garbage. But beyond that, it doesn't look like the currency's doing well, and I would have to say that it does also appear that the Russian Federation will probably not be having that good of a time, at least in my opinion, with the whole economy almost collapsing on top of them ordeal, which they're dealing with at this moment. But moving on.
Also, Enforcer, I see that Luke Bauer said in the live chat, he said it is a hyperinflationary event. And on that one, I would have to agree that it looks like hyperinflation, or if you want to call it hyper devaluation. He said now is when we're really at risk for really someone pushing the nuke button in desperation. And I will say that I'm still not on the same page of saying that nukes are about to fly tomorrow or in the next couple of hours. It probably still is a decent ways off. It is getting closer nonetheless. But if there's any situation that could cause Putin to go right off the cliff, it would be his economy in Russia completely collapsing. Because once the civilians realize their economy is indeed going under and there's no saving it, that's when you start having some severe problems with the civilian population, and that's when Putin's regime's power over the country really starts to get put at risk. So Putin knows that, and he may find a way to maybe redirect attention of his population towards something else, perhaps let's say a war with NATO, to get their minds off of this, so that way he doesn't lose his power and lose his whole country's stability for whatever it has left. So I would have to agree with you. It's kind of getting to that point.
I would have to agree. It's looking incredibly bad. And then that throws us into the second question here, considering that topic, considering that we're saying that, economics really running out of control and pretty much leading to a collapse like we're about to be seeing here in a second, may lead someone to be a little bit more apt to use a nuclear weapon. It seems as though a lot of people are talking about Russia placing the Satan IIs, or as they are called in Russia, the Sarmat, on combat alert after NATO discussed giving Ukraine nukes. And a lot of people have been putting in their thoughts, and it doesn't really seem like a lot of people are really putting a lot of faith into this at the moment. So Matthew, what are people thinking about it, and what are you thinking as well?
So it looks like 63% of the audience said it's simply extreme saber rattling by Putin by putting the Satan II nukes, which may or may not be working, on combat alert status, while 21% said it's a real threat and NATO should beware, while 10% said it seems serious but kind of minor at the same time. And on this one, I would say that we should take it seriously because any nuclear threat, even if it is saber rattling, shouldn't be simply dismissed as nothing because, of course, it still is nonetheless a threat. And we could be looking at perhaps a situation where Putin could end up using them. But I would say I'm with the 10%. It is somewhat seeming serious, but it's really minor in the scheme of things because it really doesn't change the equation whatsoever. Because if Putin wants to launch a nuke, he doesn't have to put them on combat alert status. He can simply send the order out and start firing nukes off. So this really doesn't change anything in the reality of the situation. It simply lets us know that Putin is trying to basically tell the West that either he's willing to maybe threaten it or maybe he's willing to actually use them. So we're still in the same place we were before, and I would tend to believe that he's not actually about to fire a nuke because, once again, that would lead to everybody's destruction, and I don't think that's what Putin's goal is in mind, is to lead to his own destruction and also our destruction. That would be the worst case scenario for everybody. So I don't think he's really ready to go there just yet, and I think he pretty much is saber rattling, but kind of still something we should address. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, at least on this one, this is extreme saber rattling. I'm not really believing this one a lot. And while I have been saying for the past few days, it does look like we're getting closer to a red line here with the Russians, which I do still believe. I believe that this statement here is extreme saber rattling because anyone who knows anything about the Sarmat, just like we were talking about for a good bit, the missile is entirely unusable. There's no way to know that this thing actually would even work if they're launched. Every single test launch that we've seen ends up with about a 60 to 70% chance of failure. That is how many times the Sarmat has failed when it has been launched. To put that into comparison, Minuteman IIIs, which have been in service with the U.S. Armed Forces for about the entirety of 50 years at this point, have a failure rate that is next to none. There's hardly any Minuteman IIIs that fail when launched, and when they do, it is an incredibly rare scenario. On the other hand, the Sarmat is failing almost every single time they're about to be launched or being launched. It's an absolute abysmal failure rate. And for them to say that we're only putting the Sarmats on high alert, that's either trying to get ignorant people to believe that there's some serious threat. And when I say ignorant, I don't mean stupid people who can't read. I'm saying people who are ignorant about this weapon system and its abilities beyond what they list on the playing card. People who don't know that this system has a high chance of failure before it even gets airborne would think that this is a serious threat. Anyone else who knows the actual operational history and testing history of this system would know that the Sarmat is not anything to be seriously considered, and for this reason, this is just extreme saber rattling to try and captivate people who don't really know a lot about the Sarmat and only know what the Russian propaganda states, which is that it can fly all the way around the South Pole and towards the United States from its southern border, where we do not have any nuclear detection systems, and hit us blindly. That's what people hear, that's what people are going to be scared about, and that's what that threat's for, is for people who would not know any better when hearing about that, rather than knowing the system sucks and it probably will never end up working, because the Russians do not have the funds nor the intelligence, at least within their rocketry program at this phase in history, to be able to make this weapon system fleshed out enough to where it would actually work. At least that's what I'm thinking at the moment. But speaking of people taking the Russians seriously, at least to a degree, it does appear that the German Republic, I believe it's actually, let me make sure to get the official name of Germany because I want to make sure to say the name correctly. And so, let's see, the official name of Germany is the Federal Republic of Germany. I was going to say that, and then I was like, I'm not sure if that's right or not. But nevertheless, the Federal Republic of Germany today has stated that they are starting to consider that espionage attacks by the Russians covertly may invoke NATO's Article 5, as this form of hybrid warfare is going on a little bit too long, and the Germans believe that it's causing a decent amount of damage. This was reported directly from Reuters, so we do know that this is a very credible source on a government statement made by the Germans, but according to what we've heard and summarized in the Reuters publication, Russia's extensive use of hybrid measures against Western targets increases the risk that NATO may eventually consider invoking the alliance's Article 5 Mutual Defense Clause, and that is according to the head of Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service, stated today and quoted by Reuters, and then published on Twitter by Insider Paper. It does appear that the German government, at least at this point, in some echelons, is considering the invocation of Article 5 due to Russian espionage and sabotage strategies and tactics that have been implemented on European and American countries over the short while that we've seen. And we have seen a decent amount of these go on. We have seen that Raytheon and Base Systems have both been subjected to targeted attacks by certain sorts of foreign actors. We've even seen that the Rheinmetall CEO had an assassination plot foiled on him earlier this year that was going to be conducted by the Russian Federation. We have seen time and time again that the Russian Federation has attempted some sort of covert attacks against Western, I guess you could say, military production abilities, and not only that, key infrastructure, as the Yuping 3 just ended up sabotaging major undersea communication lines into the Baltics and also into Scandinavian countries from Germany. We've also seen that there is still a decent argument being made that the Russians may have been the ones to somehow sabotage one of the Nord Stream pipelines inside the Baltic Sea, although that's still at large, and we really don't know who exactly did that, as everyone's claiming that it was someone else entirely different. Some are saying it was the Ukrainians, some are saying that it was some Polish national who just had a yacht and went out there and did it single-handedly. Others are saying that it was the Russians. Some people are saying it's the Chinese. Some people say it's America. Some people say it was actually the Germans themselves. No one really knows who actually destroyed the Nord Streams, but still, this critical infrastructure that has been attacked, and we are largely able to attribute to the Russians, such as trying to sabotage war industry and also trying to sabotage critical communications infrastructure, could possibly create an invocation of Article 5. However, there is a decent argument to be said that it could not, because if we actually read the specific wordage in the NATO Charter, you can see that that might not really be supported that well and would be a pretty possibly baseless argument. As we can see here, just to get you all down here, and let's see here. Let's see, here we go. Article 6 is what lays out the parameters that Article 5 can be invoked. So to explain how NATO's charter works, NATO is a defensive alliance. Pretty much what it is it's a massive defensive pact. And a defensive pact is an agreement in between one country to another individually, where they agree that if the other one is attacked, they will both respond in the defense of the country that was attacked. So in a particular example, in World War II, there was we won't go with that. I'll just come up with a hypothetical one to make sure that we can make it a lot easier. Let's just say there are no treaties in the world at this point, and we're making them brand new. So America says, Britain, I love you. And America really does love Britain. Britain's a pretty cool place. And Britain's like, I love you too, America. And they're like, you know what? We love each other so much, we would hate to see the other one go by getting invaded from some other country and being taken over. So how about this? Let's get into a mutual agreement where we will defend each other. A defensive pact. So that way, if the Russians attack and invade the United Kingdom, America will join the war in Britain's defense and on their side. And if the same thing happened to America and Russia invaded America, Britain would come to the defense of the United States and join their side in the war. That's exactly what NATO is, but instead of it being just in between America and Britain, it's between every single country in NATO combined. So Britain has a defensive pact collectively by being a part of NATO with Norway, Sweden, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, Belgium, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, I believe Austria at this point, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, Turkey, and I believe a couple of other countries as well, which I'm unfortunately not listing. But nevertheless, that is the same for every single country. So pick a country that is in NATO, like Poland, and they have in a pretty decent sense, a individual defensive pact with every single other country that is in NATO. But for this defensive pact to come into effect, where everyone comes to the defense of another country, there's a specific kind of an attack that has to occur for that to be invoked, and that is laid out within Article 6. And Article 6 gives us a very clear understanding of what Article 5 can be invoked over. So, here we go. For the purpose of Article 5, an armed attack on one or more of the parties is deemed to include an armed attack either on the territory of any of the parties in Europe or North America, on the Algerian departments of France, which have been omitted because those don't exist anymore, on the territory of Turkey, or on the islands under the jurisdiction of any of the parties in the North Atlantic area, north of the Tropic of Cancer, or on the forces, vessels, or aircraft of any of the parties when in or over these territories or any other area in Europe, in which occupation forces of any of the parties or station on the date when the treaty entered into force coasts, or the Mediterranean Sea, or the North Atlantic area, north of the Tropic of Cancer. So we can see that there are specific geographical parameters to what Article 5 can be invoked over, and what it actually can be brought forward on. And we can see here that in Article 6, it says that if an armed attack is to happen on the territory of any of the parties in Europe or North America, blah, 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 pretty much laying out the geographical parameters as being everything north of the Tropic of Cancer and being in Europe or in the Atlantic, that can be invoked. The issue is, however, is what is happening in a covert form an armed attack? And by definition, it isn't. And that's where there is a large conversation to be had about whether this German statement is a valid reason to be able to invoke Article 5. Because what Russia is doing is a hybrid form of warfare where they're conducting largely espionage and sabotage against different forms of Western war industry and also critical infrastructure, but that does not constitute or even fill the definition of an armed attack. That is more so of a form of espionage or some sort of activity involving spy work, which is not an armed attack, as spies are not considered to be a part of an armed force, therefore a part of an armed attack. But nevertheless, a lot of people do not also understand this either. And while I'm laying out that at least by the black and white letters of the NATO Charter, this wouldn't really fill the definition of a Article 5 invocation laid out under Article 6, it doesn't really matter. Because the thing is that the NATO Charter only means what the people in NATO want it to mean. So if NATO wants to view an armed attack collectively as some sort of form of espionage or sabotage conducted on a nation in NATO by the Russian Federation, that will actually fill the criteria under Article 6 and allow for an actual conflict to begin that NATO can then start to work towards. So a lot of people are wondering, and this is a very interesting question here, would what the Russians are doing right now, would that actually trigger an Article 5 invocation? And a lot of people seem to be saying that that actually is a valid reason. And Matthew, what are people actually saying about it, and what are you thinking about it as well?
Looks like 58% of the audience said that would be a valid reason for invoking Article 5 if the hybrid warfare continues and gets worse, while 17% said that would be an overreaction by NATO and probably not a wise thing to do, and 13% said it's simply all talk and there's no need to worry at all. And I would say that if a hybrid warfare continues like they're doing right now, like Russia's doing toward the West, basically going in and sabotaging places, blowing things up, and basically trying to pretend like it's really not them doing it, but we all know it's Russia behind the scenes pulling it off. And if this starts escalating and getting worse, I would say that that should maybe lead to Article 5, but it would have to get much worse. It would have to be a much more widespread and also quite more frequent for that to be a valid reason for invoking Article 5, meaning the world would go to a world war basically against Russia. It would have to be very serious. So while I do say it is a valid reason, I'm with the 58%, it would have to be a little bit more worsened to actually get to that point. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, in my opinion, I do not believe that this is a valid reason to invoke Article 5. I'll actually have to go against the majority here because I like to view things by the letter, and considering that the NATO Charter does not directly allow for an armed response in its original wordage, which it's still upheld in its original wordage to this day, with a few amendments to exclude such things as the Algerian departments of France, because the Algerian departments of France simply no longer exist. I generally do not think that this actually fills the criteria to be able to invoke Article 5, because Article 5 is specifically, once again laid out by the parameters of Article 6, an armed attack against one of the countries. What the Russians are doing is not an armed attack, and there is a decent amount of culpable deniability that the Russians are able to create on a diplomatic situation about whether these forms of sabotage or espionage are actually being conducted by the Russians. And I once again want to remind everyone that while it is incredibly clear to us on the outside that correlation does equal causation in this instance, because we've never seen defense industries in the Western world catching on fire in arson attacks and largely being seriously damaged from it, but they only started to do that once a war in Ukraine began and the West started to support Ukraine heavily, there still is not a direct connection in between the Russians and these arson or sabotage attacks, at least on war industry components, because we have never been able to find the people who actually did it, or at least their information has never been publicly stated. And if the United Kingdom, where a large amount of these attacks happened, or the United States, where some of these attacks have happened, for example, the Scranton ammunition plant in Pennsylvania, we would have already stated that publicly, and we would have said we would have caught a Russian agent that was operating on behalf of the Russian Federation. They've admitted to it, and they conducted these attacks against NATO. Therefore, we are going to consider this an armed attack in some form. We'll try and extrapolate that sort of an understanding out of what happened, and then we'll be able to move forward. We have never been able to find the people who actually did this to confirm whether they're state actors or not. However, there is one instance where we can say that they did, which is the Yuping 3. The Yuping 3 was entirely crewed by the Russian Federation's sailors, for the large part. They are citizens of the Russian Federation. Not a single person on that crew was not Russian. However, the problem once again is that there isn't really a decent argument to be said that that was an armed attack. It was, from what we understand, it was some sort of an anchor or something, some other heavy object with a hook on it that was being dragged off the back of Yuping 3 on the ocean floor that ripped up the cables. That doesn't really constitute an armed attack. Maybe we could make it constitute an armed attack if we want to, but I feel like that's a fairly big stretch. And I see people...
Wouldn't it be better, like, for example, instead of declaring like Article 5 on that one or trying to invoke Article 5, wouldn't it be better for the West simply to go and cut one of Russia's cables and say, okay, you cut our cable, we're cutting yours now, so you don't have any right to respond because you literally just got, done cutting our own cable. So at that point, I doubt Russia would respond, and we'd be even at that point, and maybe that would deter Russia from doing it again in the future instead of literally say, let's go to world war over the cable being cut.
Yeah, I would say that probably would be better. Of course, we wouldn't openly say that. We would just cut a cable and just, go, oh, who did that? I don't know. We would do something like that because that's what you have to do on this kind of a diplomatic playing field. It's always about being covert about it and not openly or overtly saying it, because then the Russians could go, oh, no, that is an act of war, and then they could do that because now the ball is in their court to react. So we would still have to do it overtly. And I also saw, I believe it was Nickelodeon Surname say, this isn't a court of law. And yeah, you can make that argument, but once again, the thing is that there really is no actual process laid out in NATO for the invocation of Article 5. It requires for all the countries to come together in NATO and all unitedly agree that something did happen, and these are the kind of arguments that you would hear in a plenary assembly of the NATO members in Brussels on what should be done. And these are all the kind of considerations that I'm trying to give out, because it's never a black and white interpretation, especially when it comes to the NATO Charter, because the NATO Charter doesn't really have a lot of additional addendums attached to it that says, okay, this is how you go about interpreting what an attack is. It's just simply laid out in black and white in Article 5 and Article 6, and then you have to really fill in the blanks with your own interpretation and what you believe should be done. And so for that reason, I would have to say that if I was in NATO, if I was in the plenary assembly, I would generally say that I don't believe that this is a incident worthy of an invocation of Article 5, because it doesn't constitute a armed attack by any real standard definition. You can always try and make it fill that definition, but it just doesn't easily do that. You kind of have to do some mental gymnastics to get it to fill the definition of an armed attack, in my opinion, and for that reason, it doesn't really seem to me that that would actually be a thing worthy of invoking Article 5 over. I hope that explains that, at least in how I'm interpreting it, but there are a million different interpretations. There really isn't a wrong one, because there will probably be multiple different kinds of interpretations being brought up. I mean, the Germans are already bringing up the large consensus that all of y'all have that this is worth invoking Article 5. Some people in America might agree with what I'm saying and say this doesn't really constitute an armed attack under Article 6, so Article 5 can't be invoked. The Polish could have a completely different view on this, and really any other country in NATO could. So it's really open to debate, even up until the final decision is made by NATO, what would happen in this instance, but I still largely feel like this wouldn't directly invoke Article 5, at least to me. But that's just my opinion. But anyways, with that, I hope we addressed that fairly well. And speaking of some interesting things, and speaking generally about Russian escalation, I generally would believe that United States diplomats right now and even in the future would largely agree with my assessment, because it does appear that they are still assessing that the Russian nuclear threat, regardless of the statements they're making, is still highly unlikely. That's at least according to United States intelligence that was published to Reuters today, but apparently a nuclear attack is still unlikely despite Putin's warnings, at least according to the US government, which is generally showing us that they are still getting enough information in the background that would indicate that a nuclear conflict is not going to be on the horizon, at least anytime soon. And there are still a couple of steps to be made until we're right at the very edge of any kind of a real red line. But moving on from that and out of the United States, it is time for us to move on back into the Middle East, interesting enough, as we actually have a little bit of news to cover down here that would be of interest to anyone in the Western world, and how events are largely transpiring in between US-backed forces and Russian-backed forces inside of the region. And so with that, I hope we are able to move on into this segment incredibly well, because it's going to be a very interesting one. It's actually on a topic we've never covered before on this channel, at least in any depth, but we will be tonight. Before we get into that, though, I do want to make sure that we grab a handful of questions from the chat. So, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, and it's now time for our first super chat segment of the night, and our first super chat is going to go to none other than Kimberly Brokaw, who's a longtime channel legend who throws in a $100 donation, and thank you very much, Kimberly, for that support as always. And she said, "Happy Thanksgiving to everyone," and take one from the chat.
Hey, and happy Thanksgiving to you, and thank you so much for the massive support, Kimberly Brokaw, because Thanksgiving is tomorrow. For everyone who may be not in the United States currently, because about half of our audience is not American, tomorrow is a major national holiday here in the United States, November 28th, which is when the federal government declares it is a day of Thanksgiving. It is a national tradition in this country to have a Thanksgiving. It's been so for an incredibly long time, at least since the middle of the 1800s. Some people, now I do want to say this, some people are going to say, no, like they're about to tell me I'm wrong, because the first Thanksgiving was actually conducted in the Pilgrims colony in the Massachusetts Bay Area. And that is true, but the thing is about that, though, is that it was not declared as a federal holiday until, I believe, the mid-1800s, if I'm remembering correctly. So that's when it really became a American-wide tradition and not just a tradition of the Massachusetts and New England area. But nevertheless, Thanksgiving is a really important time in this country, because Thanksgiving commemorates a very early part of American history when some of the settlers that would create this amazing republic that we live in today weren't really living in fortunate or prosperous times like we are now. Settling a new continent is an incredibly difficult thing, and from what we largely understand, it was incredibly difficult for the Pilgrim colonies of the Massachusetts Bay Area during the very early, well, actually, I believe it was the mid to later part of the 1600s, if I'm remembering the story correctly. Hardship, famine, and poor weather had ended up claiming about a third of every single settler's lives that were in the original Massachusetts colony when it landed in the area. Luckily, and also the original colony that I'm talking about is the colony of Plymouth, right here, which is, crazily enough, where kind of the entire Massachusetts Bay colony ended up growing out of. Boston ended up becoming the major city, but at least for this time, Plymouth was the one. Like, Plymouth was the town. It really was the only one in the area. But beyond that, what is interesting is that thanks to local tribes, the Wampanoags, which actually requested armed support from the Pilgrims in a battle against an enemy tribe, they pledged that they would help to help encourage and support and foster the growth of agricultural abilities for the Pilgrims, so that way they could then prosper in this new world. The Pilgrims actually agreed to providing armed support to the Wampanoags, and they were able, along with the Wampanoags, to crush the rivaling tribe that the Wampanoags were trying to beat. In return, the Wampanoags did hold up their original agreement and ended up supporting the Pilgrims and their agricultural endeavors in the New World, which created a bountiful harvest by the next year. That bountiful harvest was largely celebrated by both the Wampanoags and the Pilgrims, considering that they had a military alliance at the time, and that was the first Thanksgiving in American history. Since then, it started to grow outside the New England area, became a national holiday in the mid-1800s, and became a mainstay and a staple of American holiday traditions until very recently, when Christmas largely took over November, and now it's just Halloween, and then it goes straight to Christmas, and Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas for You is broadcasted over every single damn store in America for about 2 straight months and drives everyone crazy. But I'll tell you this, Mariah Carey is getting paid out for those 2 months.
Oh, she's making bank. I'll tell you what, those licensing royalties must be beautiful.
It's got to, those royalties, man, that are flooding in, it got to be insane. Like, having that played in so many stores for 2 straight months now. It used to just be a month. It used to be really from December 1st to December 30th and around New Year's. And now it's quite literally from November 1st to December 30th. It's insane how long that goes on now. But nevertheless, Thanksgiving is an absolutely incredible holiday. And I do have to let y'all know that we are going to be taking the day off tomorrow. There will be no stream for tomorrow because we're going to be celebrating Thanksgiving with our family. And of course, it's an important time to think of what we are thankful for. And there are many things to be thankful for in the modern world. Our strong armed forces, the amazing republic that we live in, your friends and family, all kinds of things that one can be thankful for, because there are quite a lot of blessings that we have here, especially in the Western world. Like here in America, I gotta say, I'm personally thankful for all kinds of incredible things. Thousands of things, honestly, that we have here in this great nation of ours. But nevertheless, I do thank you so much, amazingly, Kimberly Brokaw, for that incredible support and wishing us a happy Thanksgiving, because we wish all of y'all a happy Thanksgiving as well. And we thank you once again for supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running, because folks like you make it possible for us to be running news live all the way up until Thanksgiving Day. And so a huge thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat here goes to none other than Marlene Mercer, LSA, who puts in a $25 donation, and thank you very much, Marlene, for that support, as always. And I don't see a comment attached to the super chat, and let me double check that real quick and make sure I did not miss that comment. And it looks like it wasn't indeed no comment attached. It was a super sticker of the YouTube lemon creature in front of a bush, and it's absolutely having a good time. I'm not sure what it's doing, but it's there, and thank you very much, Marlene, for that support. And Enforcer, what say you?
Man, that lemon's going, wah, or something like that. I don't know what it's doing. I don't know. But beyond that,
it's going,
dude, it's saying, we will destroy Bashar al-Assad, inshallah. It's like, yeah, it's like, I can get behind that one, destroying Bashar al-Assad. I'm 100% behind that one. We're actually going to get to that here in just a second. But I do thank you so much for the support, Marlene Mercer, a legend of an LSA, and an old guard as well, for supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running. Because it is folks like you who help to make this thing possible, who make it a reality for us to be on air right now. You allow us to bump our gums. And while you didn't put anything in your super chat for us to bump our gums over, we are still happy and greatly appreciative that you're supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running even right before Thanksgiving, so that we can keep bumping our gums up until the final hour. And so a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the last question of this segment, and then we're getting on into the rest of the news.
All right, and also real quick, I was kindly reminded by Anani Mouse that we did not grab the live chat for Kimberly. So we will be returning back to that one and grabbing that live chat, and sponsored by Kimberly Burkall. And this one goes to Joe Emily from the live chat that says, can a massive cyber attack compromise a U.S. and Russian nuclear launches?
No, they will never be able to do that, even on the Russian side or on the American side, because our entire nuclear system is run through analog computers. It's done for that specific reason, so that way they cannot be hacked into, because that was already assessed to be a major security risk way back in the day by the United States when the modern digital age started becoming a thing in the 90s. And so they decided that instead of upgrading the systems, they would actually just repair and maintain the old original analog computer systems, so that way they cannot be hacked into. So to answer that question, absolutely not. Nuclear weapons will never be fired because Hacker Man, Hacker Man gets into the system and then launches the nukes himself. That will never happen. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Very good question, though, because a lot of people think that nuclear systems run on modern computer programs, and I promise you, no one is playing World of Warcraft on the same computer that's used to launch a Minuteman 3. That's just not happening out there. But still, I hope that does address that the best I can. Thank you for sponsoring that live chat, Kimberly Burkall, and sorry we didn't catch that the first time. But with that, we are on to the final question of the segment, and then we're going to be moving on down into the middle of the East.
All right, and the last one here goes to David Kotke, who puts in a $20 donation, and thank you very much, David, for that support. He said, you gents are awesome as always, and please take one from the chat.
Hey! Hey, and I gotta thank you so much for the kind words and helping this channel to keep on running, David. And I gotta say, thank you for saying that we're awesome as always. You're awesome as always. Everyone in the LSA is awesome as always. And I gotta say that it's wonderful to know that everyone is here with us tonight. We didn't really know what kind of viewership to expect. Usually a lot of people are already traveling for Thanksgiving or have already traveled, so our viewership starts to drop off before Thanksgiving Day. But crazily enough, even still, tonight, we had 12.1 thousand people here at the peak, which is crazy because that's only 400 less than there was last night. So we were absolutely blown away with that. And we got to thank everyone for being here again tonight and watching the news. And if you're enjoying it, you know, now merciless plug, please make sure to subscribe, like, and comment because we like to see it. It makes us happy. But beyond that, I do thank you so much once again for the support. And of course, David, we are always happy to have you here in the Lee Spring Army. We hope you're having a fun one tonight. And we will make sure to take one from the chat, and then we're going to be moving on into the middle of the East. So what do we have, Matthew?
All right, so this one from the chat is going to go to Miller Pebble, who says, what are the chances that we may see East and West German borders restored once again?
Never. That will never happen. Like, for NATO to be beaten back that badly, I think the nukes would fly if the Russians somehow pushed all the way through the Baltics and Poland and then into Germany to create a Warsaw Pact again. I do not think East and West Germany will ever emerge again. It was quite honestly an abomination, in my opinion, that East and West Germany ever even existed in the first place because it was not supposed to exist. It was supposed to be a very temporary sort of an arrangement where the different allies created occupational zones. So there was a British, French, American, and Soviet occupational zone, and then eventually, within the next few years, after World War II, it was all supposed to be reintegrated into a single Germany, which would have the borders that it had today. But then, of course, due to the complete collapse of relations in between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies, we saw that that never happened, and then there was an independent West Germany and then East Germany that was created. The West Germans were actually called the Federal Republic of Germany, which they're still called today. Well, the entirety of Germany is called that today, but the East Germans were actually called, I believe it was the People's Republic of Germany. Once again, showing you the whole commie thing is to say the People's Republic instead of just the Federal Republic or something along those lines. Because they got to make sure to really emphasize that democratic part as they put that boot down in your face for like the 900,000th time. But nevertheless, I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you for a very interesting live chat there. I hope that explains that somewhat well. But moving on from that, and on into the Middle East, we have news today. The ceasefire is over. That's right, folks. Only 12 hours after the ceasefire was put into effect, air raid sirens were sounding over northern Israel again as another rocket attack was fired by Hezbollah. Yippee! Wasn't that fast? It literally happened overnight. So, looks like the war is back on, folks. And it looks like the Secretary of State tried his best and probably failed at that because it literally did not last longer than a day. So, we are going to be waiting to see what the further actions are, but the air raid sirens did go off, and we were able to hear that there was already more rockets being fired by Hezbollah into northern Israel. So, we'll be waiting to see where that goes from here. Moving on from that, though, it's now time for us to move on into a whole new fun can of worms that has been going on for the entire time that we've been covering the news on this channel, and well before that, actually it's been going on for about, I think, 13 years at this point. It's about to be going on for about 14 years at the beginning of next year, but it is everyone's favorite war in the Middle East, the one that happened all the way back in the Arab Spring and is still going on to this day, kind of like the one that happened in Yemen. But it is actually, crazily enough, the Syrian Civil War. Hey, isn't that crazy? Don't y'all remember that whole thing? Like, you know, when Bashar al-Assad was like mistreating his citizens, and there was this whole thing across the entire, I guess you could say, the Islamic or Arab world, where everyone was tired of the corrupt regimes and governments in charge of their country, and they started uprisings to try and get rid of these corrupt governments and bring forward democracies. Well, it's still going on. Like, it's crazy. The fight for democracy is still going on inside of Syria, which is actually a crazy thing because it's been going on for 13 years. Like, so many things have changed since the start. It went from Assad dropping chemical agents on people to now there are actually defined front lines really spanning the entirety of the Euphrates River, and the Syrian Democratic Forces pretty much control everything north of the Euphrates River, and the Assad regime controls everything south of the river. And there's also this U.S. occupational zone at Atamf down here, which is controlled by the United States directly, even still. But nevertheless, What's interesting about this war is that it's pretty much gone dormant for the past 4 years. So right when the new decade was beginning that we're in right now, the war pretty much came to a stop. It didn't technically come to a stop. It was still active, but there was no real fighting going on at that point. And for the past 4 years, this war has pretty much gone only mentioned as a footnote because it had pretty much stopped for the entire time we've been covering the news on this channel, but it's finally started up again. And just to let y'all know, here are the players involved. One, we have the American-aligned Democratic Forces of Syria, called the SDF, which are in the northern area of Syria and also control the area around Idlib. Although, I believe it is Idlib. Yeah, I'm just making sure. But Idlib is technically controlled by another faction. It's still an American-aligned faction, but nevertheless, these entire areas north of the Red Line, or on the upper side of the Red Line, are all controlled by the Syrian Democratic Forces and American-aligned forces inside of the country. The areas in green are the Turks. They don't really do anything, but they're there, and that's a whole thing in its own that pisses us off with Turkey. But nevertheless, everything on the other side of the line is controlled by the Bashar al-Assad regime, which is actually backed up and propped up by the Russian Federation. And the Russian Federation has actually had armed forces on the ground inside of Syria for just about the entire length of the Syrian civil war. As a matter of fact, interestingly enough, there was a battle at a time that happened in between U.S. forces and Wagner. And I just want to go pull that up. One second. And let me go.
I bet the U.S. forces swept the floor with Wagner.
Man, well, you would be surprised, Matthew. It actually went much differently. It went very differently, actually. This was the Battle of Al-Qasham, which was a very interesting kind of a battle because it was where technically Russian forces, because Wagner pretty much was Russian up until the coup, Russian forces and American forces went head-to-head in Syria and actually duked it out. And you wouldn't believe how it went. It was crazy. The immortal mighty Russians, with their unbelievable might and power that they always wield, because America exists at the benevolence of our enemies, North Korea, China, Russia, and Iran. They could simply wipe us off the map in an instant. Matthew, they fought us on the open battlefield, and we killed them all. like I'm not kidding. Here's the losses really quickly. Casualties and losses. None. And then one SDF fighter was wounded. According to what we understand, the United States claims that we killed approximately 100 to 200 Wagner troops and some Syrian forces. The Syrians claim that they only lost 55 killed, which we're still mogging on them because we didn't lose a single person wounded even. The Russians claim that there was 80 to, well, the unofficial Russian claims say that there was only 80 to 100 killed and 200 wounded. So we knocked out about 3 entire companies of Russian and Syrian forces. And then the SOHR claimed that only 68 had been killed, and then the University of Southern Denmark claimed that there was about 65 to 200 Russians killed in the battle. Regardless of who you go with here, it's pretty clear the Russians got curb stomped, even by the Syrians. They say that they got curb stomped. It went horribly. It went as bad as you would think it would go. And this was great because this happened in 2019, well, actually 2018 specifically, and it only lasted for a day. I mean, I want to remind you all this. This was a very small engagement, and from what we understand, most of the forces that were involved on this side were all a part of the Wagner group. And while they say that some of them were from the 4th Division and such things like that, we still understand that most of those forces were actually Wagner. And we wiped the floor. This was like the whole prelude to the Russian army getting obliterated in Ukraine for 3 straight years was this one battle. Because when you think about it, and we're going off of the U.S. claim, the United States, in a small battle against a small group of mercenaries that the Russians pretty much fielded entirely on their own, was able to knock out on the middle ground end 150 of them in 24 hours in a small battlefield that was only about, I think, 10 miles wide. So let's think about that. If we were fighting the Russian Federation on a battlefield as wide as Ukraine, we would be making the Ukrainian casualty reports on the Russians look like a joke by this point in the war. In fact, I don't even think the war would be going on this long. It would have been over by now. So I just want to remind people of that the Russians already have gone up against America, and they gave themselves a pretty bad name, man. Man, yeah, you can't imagine the stuff, man. It's crazy when you think about it. Casualties and losses just says by the American flag, none. It's like they didn't even dent the U.S. forces. They didn't even wound anyone or make us lose a single vehicle. We wiped the floor.
The Wagner forces have sucked literally for the entire time they've been in existence. Like Prigozhin did a terrible job with his little mercenary group there, because they never did good with anything. And also, they had their one chance to take over Russia, and then they blew it literally right before they got to Moscow. So to me, I think Wagner's just been a joke the whole time.
Man, but something, man, like the Americans sat there, man, and they heard, what's this place called? Kasham? And they said, Kasham. Well, I guess what? We're going to throw Al Shazam on the Russians, and then we just obliterated like 150 of them. It's like, that's crazy when you think about it. But I always get a laugh out of this battle, because I never even knew, because this was another battle that showed us how bad off the Wagner was, is that when the Wagner was introduced into the war in Ukraine, a whole bunch of, the Russian glazers in America were like, oh no, it's over. Wagner's here, and they beat our ass in Syria. It's like, no, they didn't. They didn't even wound anyone. Like they were coming at us with box cutters at that point. They were just outmatched. It's like they didn't stand a chance, and they still don't stand a chance, because now America really isn't in the SDF territory. We're still there a little bit. There's U.S. forces scattered about all throughout northern Syria in small little garrisons. But what is great is that today, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are only kind of armed and supported lightly by America at this point, started a major offensive near Aleppo, just to the the eastern side of Aleppo. And we were able to hear today that massive ground operations were started by the SDF in this area. And we then saw that it was going bad. Let me show you one of the little neat weapons that the SDF used to attack the Russian Federation's forces and also the Syrians outside of Aleppo.
Yeah, keep yelling that.
Yeah! Oh, and they got him. they hit him good. And then the next thing we saw, now this was a big shock, y'all, is that al-Assad's guys, as well as the Russian guys who were defending this line outside of Aleppo, were running in mass. They're routing.
Also, there's freaking chaos there. All these videos.
Man, every time we go into the area of the Middle East, it is always just absolute chaos. It is like, I would say this is like sandbox mode down here, honestly, with how wars are fought. But there they go. Off into the wild. I don't even know where they're going. I guess towards Aleppo. But they are routing. From what we understand, the SDF completely caught the Syrian forces and the Russian forces in the area off guard and are already starting to rapidly approach the actual city of Aleppo again, and may end up retaking it here very soon in a pitched battle that will probably span over months. But still, it is wonderful to see that American-backed forces inside of Syria are once again putting a black eye on the Syrian government run by Bashar al-Assad, which is Russian aligned, as well as the Russian Federation, because it's about damn time that this started to kick off again, and hopefully we'll see that the Ashit regime is put into some trouble again to try and get that name correct. I hope I didn't mispronounce that there. But moving on from Syria and on up into the area of Ukraine, we're now getting on into the nitty-gritty of the Ukraine war, and boy, do we have a lot of footage today. And it's crazy to say that because we have still loads of news to cover, and we've just been kind of covering everything on the periphery of Ukraine, and now it's time to actually get into the meat of the news, which is the Ukraine war. So moving on into Kursk, we finally got to see where the actual attack occurred, and our information was a little off, because we said that the attack happened west of Kursk. It literally was on Kursk and on its eastern side, just off to the right, which is at the Kalino airfield right here. This is the military airfield that the Ukrainians struck, and you actually can see some Russian aircraft here, even on satellite. From what we understand, there was 1 or 2 S-400 batteries that were stationed at the airfield, providing an air defense dome over the city of Kursk, and it appears that the air defense dome got domed because the ATACMS did impact the airfield, causing significant damage to the S-400 systems, which we can also see a Panzer up there on top of that ramp. Dude, that's one hell of a ramp that they build right there for that thing. Like, I think freaking Evil Knievel could use that for a jump.
Yes, seriously, he could.
I mean, really? He could use it for a jump, my boy. But we can still see the damage from the ATACMS. We can also see the ATACMS debris. And also, Matthew, I'm telling you, man, it's that Mac, man. I'm telling you 100%, man. But look at that debris. And it is 100% an ATACMS right there. Beautiful to see. Good to know that it was able to cause some good damage. Meanwhile, down in the Kursk area, we were able to see that the Ukrainians were continuing to slam Russian forces that were trying to conduct more offensives in the area. And, oh, it did not go well. And, oh, this guy's trying to run. Oh, he tried to whack it with an AK. Oh, and the loaf got hit. Oh, and another one got hit. Oh, my goodness. It's a loaf apocalypse. Oh, my God. They are destroying loaves. And, oh, is that a Chinese ATV? It's not anymore. And what's this here? And I don't even know what the hell we're looking at anymore. They're just hitting, like, thingamajigs. But we can now see them hitting all other Russian vehicles as well. Look at that. This is amazing work. And hitting a KAMAZ. And, what is that? Is that another Chinese AT? No, that's just a four-wheeler. Oh, that was a terrible
man,
one.
that's just a goofy.
Oh, and they're getting an... Oh, they got another one. Oh, it's toasty. Oh, my goodness. Man, it's like Little Caesar's hot and ready, man. It's cooked to perfection in less than 5 minutes. Oh, my Lord. And they're getting another one. Ole mole. Oh. And that's the end of that clip, but just amazing stuff right there. And moving on from that and on to our next clip, we were also able to see some Russian forces getting hit by the 36th Marine Brigade. And we can see here the drone just chilling. It's ready to go in. And we can see our orc right here. And the Ukrainians are about to turn him into pulled orc. Oh, and it just happened right there. Finger licking good. Delicious. But nevertheless, we can... Oh, look at that. A little flare right there. Matthew, how's that Windows plugin doing you?
Oh yeah, man, it's doing fantastic over here. I can't hear jack shit.
Man, it took you like 20 seconds to respond to that. I think I sent that message to you by carrier pitch, and it wasn't even through Discord at that point. But moving on from that, we were able to see more Russian forces being repelled right here. And we can see here the Russians. Oh, just got hit by an anti-tank mine. Oh, my heavens. And it's on fire instantly. Oh, and they got him. My goodness. I'm telling you what, call the Russians Lada's pressure cookers, because I've never seen them cook anything that tender before. And they just keep running over them like that. Like, I don't know how they don't see that they're running into a minefield headlong, but they just do it. Okay, they do it over and over. You would think that 3 years in, they would have learned that once the lead vehicles hit, they're running into a anti-tank minefield, and yet they just keep driving in like they have no sense. There goes another, and they just end up having an entire convoy lost to a minefield. There's a tank, another $3.5 million tank lost, because they just can't grasp that if you're driving to a minefield, you stop and you back out. You don't keep going. It's absolutely horrendous here, and you can see that tank's just a nice broil right there. We're trying to make it Thanksgiving-like here. We're talking about food. And I bet you that fire right there will cook you a delicious turkey. And we can see that the video fades out right there. And of course, the Ukrainians were able to repel another assault. But what's this, folks? Some Russians aren't getting the gravy? Well, they certainly aren't, because it appears that they had to end up surrendering today from the elite 810th Naval Infantry Brigade.
Рады, что попали в плен день морской пехоты.
Рады. Мы 810-я бригада, морская пехота Российской Федерации. Сдались в плен в День морской пехоты. Благодарим за то, что нам сохранили жизни и к нам прекрасно относятся. Не рекомендую гражданинам Российской Федерации идти в армию, идти по контракту. И в первую очередь не идти в морскую пехоту. Там ужасно.
Well, hopefully some Russians heed their very wise words indeed from this dark basement. But moving on out of the Kursk Oblast and on into our location unknowns, we were able to see some pictures of Ukrainians in training. As many people know, that on-the-job training is good, but in a wartime you really don't want a lot of that because you might not learn much from the mistakes you make. So we can see them training at the training fields. It looks quite good. Moving on from that, we were also able to see that the autumn weather is finally here. It looks like joy and pumpkin spice out there on the battlefields of Ukraine. Oh, look at that! They call it the bog. And really quickly, Matthew, I'm going to try something quite magical. Matthew, can you hear me? Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no. Matthew, can you hear me? Are you there? Matthew, can you hear me?
Jesus.
Oh, wait a minute. Are you back? Are you back? Hello? Are you there?
I just hear like the occasional
Man, well, it sounds like that Windows plugin ain't really working that well.
a Windows plugin.
Whatever you did today to the computer to try and fix it, it does not sound like that is working too well.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. Also, did stopping the screen share help you out at all?
Now it's catching up. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. I think what's happening, Matthew, is that the screen share might be doing something to overload your computer.
Maybe so, or it might be overloading someone's computer. I'm not really sure at this point.
It's not mine. You know what? Let me check really quickly. I'm gonna, one second, y'all. I want to test something out while we're live on air. So give me just a second to do that. Y'all are still gonna be able to hear me right now. But I'm gonna go pull this up and take that off the screen. And it appears that the screen share
אבא שם על הר השלג בחצי הלילה שר שירים על נס בפלא עם כל ישראל האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל איזה לילה איזה לילה איזה לילה איזה ליל האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל איזה לילה איזה לילה איזה לילה איזה ליל.
With that in mind, sorry everyone for the little delay there. I should be getting back on air here in a second. And let me see. There we go. Sorry about that, y'all. That was holding y'all off air for too long. But nevertheless, I'm going to keep that open on the side, Matthew, while screen sharing. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, good. So I'm going to keep that off screen to the side so that way I can just see if anything happens, you know, memory-wise, CPU-wise, and see if anything happens with that. Because from what I still know, it's not my computer, and I think I have some witnesses in the chat because I've done incredibly computer-intensive things with them on my computer, and the Discord calls never just completely cut out, lagged, or anything like that. But moving on from that, we have the Russian casualty report, and it looks like things are not going well for the Russians again.
Man! 4 Bobcats, man. What the hell is going on out here? I'm telling you what, that is a hell of a loss right there. 4 Bobcats destroyed and 1 Matt's MacBook. But tell us more.
And I gotta tell you, things ain't looking juicy for the Russians today. Medvedisa, keeper of the records, has stated that 1,580 personnel is the 12th highest troop loss, tied with November 8th of 2024, not that long ago, and drones and vehicles still remain incredibly high. And from what we are seeing right here, we have been able to see that 1,580 Russian soldiers have been wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 48 APCs, 84 supply trucks, 14 main battle tanks, 24 artillery pieces, 64 drones, 1 MLRS, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, and 4 Bobcat skid steers. Overall, today has not been that bad of a day. Like Zoink Scoop, it's not going well for him, and it looks like it's not going to be going well on into the future. But moving on from that and out of the casualty report, it's now time for us to move on down to Seversk, where we were able to see some fighting out there in the woods. Check this out. Well, you see them lighting them up, opening fire, popping them with an RPG. Pop, and there we go.
Oh, American. He said, oh, geez.
he said, "Oh shit, son."
It's not fucking shooting!
I have to applaud him for his technical abilities to assess the situation and find the problem. Load it again, boy! Get it out there! Yeah, he shot that time, damn it! Get him another one! How's the call doing, Matthew? Is the health well?
It's okay. It's hanging in there.
I'm going to close this thing because it's showing that the memory and CPU and everything's fine, so I'm going to close the task manager now. But moving on from that, it does appear battles in the Crimean Forest are still going on. Russians really aren't making any ground, but they're trying. Meanwhile, down in the Seversk area, things are going even worse for the Russians. We're going to be muting the Ultra Chad music, but y'all are already getting a little recap here by the K2 battalion. Oh, what's this? Some rustling in the bushes? Matthew, you and me know that one well from high school. That's never a good thing.
Oh man, the hot dog man. Oh man.
We've got.
Oh man.
He
was
just taking a nap. He was sleeping on the job. Y'all know how it is. But we can see here that the drone's starting to fly over the battlefield, looking down at the trenches. Oh, is that a ton of Russians? Heavens! Like, there's a lot of them. Oh, great heavens! Here we can see the Russians in their natural habitat burrowing into the tree lines. The Russians find refuge under the branches and shade of the trees. However, their natural predator, the Ukrainians, have removed most of the trees, branches, and foliage from its limbs, leaving the Russians bare and exposed on the underside. Their goal is to drive our soldiers from their positions and gain a foothold, according to the Ukrainian soldiers who made this banger of a video. The Russians begin to fire sporadically. It is very much like their fighting call to the Ukrainians to see them on the open field and possibly fight them for a mate or territory. A soldier of the K2 battalion which decided to ruin their plans. The sneaky soldier runs forward, nearly being sprayed by a Russian's erratic machine gun fire. The Ukrainian returns fire, spraying the trench and leaving the Russians discombobulated. The Russians appear to be in a panic as the Ukrainian continues to lay down heavy fire, the entire Russian squad retreating into the distance. Artillery is now landing around the surrounding areas, and the Russians are beginning to see that their turkey is truly cooked, and it will not be pardoned by their president of the Russian Federation. So much for pardoning the Thanksgiving turkey, the Russians exclaimed as they began to run further and further down the trench line, pissing their pants the entire way and leaving a wondrous scent for the Ukrainians to follow. The smoke now clears, and we can clearly see our Ukrainian soldier, the lone hero of this story, continuing to lay down some heavy rifle fire onto the retreating Russians. One Russian has decided that he may have the balls to stand off the Ukrainian and see this through to victory. However, the Ukrainian soldier is nifty and decides to climb down into the trench to engage in close-up combat with his adversary. The Russian soldier's body language is showing us that he is very unsure at the moment, as he is a young fledgling Russian and knows that an adult Ukrainian can cause serious damage. Or, as in the words of that one guy, I'm forgetting his name, Matthew, but he's the guy who yells emotional damage. Emotional damage!
I don't remember his name.
I've forgotten his name as well, unfortunately, but nevertheless, the Ukrainian continues to lay down fire onto the other Russian very uncertain as to his future fate. We can see that the K2 battalion has noted that the brave actions of one of our soldiers broke the plans of the enemy assault group, and they are now running for the hills. Unfortunately, Vadim would later take part in his last battle.
Elka said it's Stephen He that said that, apparently.
It's apparently Uncle Roger. Hiya! But nevertheless, getting back to our documentary-style video, what a great time for the K2 battalion artillery and drones with droplets. We can see the droplets trickling down onto the surface like a nice summer's rain, but this summer's rain is far deadlier than any normal summer rain. Filled with deadly shrapnel, the Russians find themselves running through a maze of death as shrapnel flies abound, striking Russians randomly front and back. We can see the Russians continuing to run through the tree lines and trying to find their way to some sort of safety. We can see one of our Russians running through this tree line, largely destroyed, and much like any other field, and it does appear that this Russian is derelict with hope. He has now gone into the bushes, where he is rustling about for some sort of a meal, but the Ukrainians strike ferociously, dispatching the Russian. This Russian and Kim Kardashian have one thing in common. They both took back shots. We can also see more artillery landing just outside of screen to the upper side. It appears that the Ukrainians are now honing in on the remainder of the Russian force. This Russian appears to be squatting in the field, most likely trying to ascertain his surroundings, as he now lifts his AK, almost using it as a baseball bat. He's now decided to leap to the ground. Some people would say that he's tripping hella. We would assume that he is most likely running from an FPV drone, another deadly species of the Ukrainian armed forces.
Also, by the way, Enforcer, I do have some breaking news that's currently taking place right now. If anybody is curious, there is currently a major attack on Ukraine right now as we speak. Russia's launching all their bombers in the air as well as their naval assets to launch missiles at Ukraine. And also the big thing is, there was many people wondering, is there going to be a major ballistic missile attack tonight? And it looks like Ukraine is now saying that Russia has indeed launched ballistic missiles. Nobody's really sure exactly what type of ballistics they are, but they have been launched. And we're currently awaiting to hear what those missiles are. It could be maybe an Iskander or something like that, but we're not really sure at the moment. But nonetheless, there's a very, very large-scale red alert across the country of Ukraine as Russia is launching a full-scale attack. So that's happening right now as we speak.
And it does appear that Ukraine is currently under attack as we are watching these Russians run perilously through the fields. And it appears that this Russian is now becoming the victim of another artillery attack. And thank you for that breaking news update, Enforcer Match. Absolutely, greatly appreciated.
Anytime, anytime. I did it through the lag, too. It's a miracle.
It is absolutely incredible, and it doesn't appear that there's a lot of lag on this end. This Russian has now taken a nap, and we will leave him to that nap. I hope y'all can hear the extra emphasis I'm putting on the P's, because I'm really putting a lot of emphasis on those P's. Speaking of peas, are any of y'all having green peas for Thanksgiving tomorrow? Leave a comment in the live chat if you are having green peas for Thanksgiving.
Also, by the way, folks, I see some people saying some more details about the attack. I'll be honest, this is my speculation for this attack that we're currently seeing. I really doubt we're going to see an IRBM launch tonight. Of course, that is simply my opinion. I could be wrong on that, but I doubt we're going to see that tonight. It sounds like these are ballistic missiles which have been launched before in the war, not the IRBM. So I think the Ukraine might be off the hook for that tonight, but it looks like Kharkiv is one of the main targets, as well as apparently Kyiv is one of the main targets as well, which is a typical target these days of the Russians. But it looks like, once again, I'm still waiting on some more details as to what those ballistics actually were that were launched.
And thank you for that, once again, great news update right there on the ongoing air attack at the moment. You're also able to see this Ukrainian giving short bursts of machine gun fire near Chasiv Yard. pretty cool. It was kind of a short clip. But moving on from that and down towards Turretsk, we also got to see some Russian artillery being destroyed as well. And I wish I could do that voice for y'all all night. Seems like a lot of people are getting a kick out of that, having a great deal of fun. But those voices actually hurt my vocal cords a good bit. And considering that we're pretty much talking nonstop these days throughout all hours of the day, our voices are pretty much shot 24/7 at this point. So it's really hard to recover from that and be able to do that time and time again. So unfortunately, I won't be able to do that a lot. But I hope y'all enjoyed it for about the 7 minutes I was doing it. Also, it appears that a lot of people like that very interesting joke that I made in the middle of it. I thank y'all for that, because we usually do not do jokes like that ever on the channel, but I thought I would throw out a little bit more of a risque joke, because I was hoping that Joe would get a little bit of a laugh. It seems like a lot of people did enjoy it, but nevertheless, we can see 2 Russian peons here getting obliterated by Ukrainian artillery fire. And that's the end of the clip right there. And that's apparently from the Safari unit, and it appears that they're out on safari. But moving on from the Turretsk area and down towards Novoselivka, Persia, Novoselivka, Persia, we were able to see that a new electronic warfare system is being used by the Russians. Now, I want to remind y'all, this is being filmed by the Russians, so here we go.
Босс, брат, расскажи, чем мы вообще здесь занимаемся?
Мы ставим Aleppo в направлении танчика. Сзади танчика.
Is that a Wagner patch? Forbidden. Illegal. Like, it's...
This guy's like a ancient fossil at this point of a begone era.
Man, why does this guy hold his mouth the same way as Casey Neistat, man? Like, why, like, what, he's got, like, the same mannerisms to his mouth.
I don't even know. I didn't even notice that.
Man, it looks like he's about to go, look at what's under the New York City sidewalk, and, like, push, like, through that concrete and then stick his camera in it or something. It looks like he's about to do that.
И при этом еще огневую поддержку с помощью дробовиков стоим, визуально смотрим цель. Как-то так.
And there's their electronic warfare system, looking fly as ever.
Где-то рядом, да?
Oh, and apparently there's a drone. Hopefully their electronic warfare system, as glorious as it is, will help save the day.
19 уже пишет.
We now see they're on the move.
It did not save up. Oh my god.
It did not save the day. Dude, I think the FPV hit the electronic warfare system, dude. Like, wait a minute. Oh no. Dude, so much for the Buhanka electronic warfare system. It was a failure off the bat. Moving on from that, we were able to see some more fighting in the Pokrovsk direction by the 15th Karadog unit. They're driving through the active battlefield, aka on a average drive into Detroit. I'm just kidding, it's actually Chicago, but we can see they're not firing an AT-4. Popping back into the armored car. Oh! You know what, folks? After I just saw that AT weapon kind of like graze the armored car, I just realized this isn't Detroit nor Chicago. This is actually Bessemer, Alabama. Because only Bessemer, Alabama has heavy anti-tank weapons available to them. So that's actually Bessemer. Correction, everyone. Sorry about that. No disrespect intended to the folks up in Chicago and Detroit, because I know that y'all only have heavy machine guns. Y'all don't have AT weapons. Bessemer is kind of special that way. Anyways. You now see them making a dash towards one of the apartment buildings. Heavy rifle fire continues. Oh, that guy had a grenade launcher. Oh, dude, he's got the good one. You now see them firing into the tree lines as they try and make their way in and engage in close quarters combat with the Russians.
Just letting loose, too.
Yeah, they are going off. We now see them moving out of the tree line and loading back into the armored car. Free grenade for the Russians. A little artillery as well. We now see them pretty much climbing right on top of the Russian dugouts. This guy actually jumped down in front of it and started clearing it out. This man is learning from the COD lobbies, like, quite legitimately. That's a COD move right there. But moving on from that, and now the Pokrovsk area, we're now moving on down towards Velika Novosilka, where we're able to see another transport van being destroyed in the Russian offensive towards Velika Novosilka. And here it comes. And that's the end of the clip right there. Very nice to see. And moving on from that and into our next one, we were also able to see them hitting a group of Russians as well in Velika Novosilka. I guess hitting on Russians takes a whole new meaning. But we get, oh my goodness, like it was a pretty solid hit. Accurate to a T.
Speaking of hitting on Russians, I've been hearing that the North Korean soldiers are showing up over there and, you know, showing up to fight on the front lines and stealing the women.
Oh, really?
That's what I've been hearing, man. I've been seeing pictures of those North Koreans posing with the Russian women, and it looks like the Russian men might be getting a little bit jealous, if you know what I mean.
Man, that may be why they're hating them, man, because they came up, like, into the Kursk Oblast, man, and, like, one of them was like, hey, yo, you ever heard of my great leader, Kim Jong-un? And then they fell for it immediately, and they're like, these assholes! Like, that may be why they're getting angry, honestly. But moving on from that, and into Polohi, we also got to see some footage from the Russian 40th Marine Brigade of the Pacific Fleet. They came all the way from Vladivostok for this, so here's the clip. A little bumpy. Now they're going off-road. What for? On their four-wheeler? Why are they doing this? Oh, is that a drone? Oh, great heavens. It's chasing them. Oh, and he fell. That's not good when running from a drone. He dropped some coins back there like Sonic the Hedgehog. And so now they're walking back towards the ATV. And now they're getting back on their way and going the other way. And that was the
also, by the way, back up real quick in this video to that little emblem at the top of their video. Like, back up for a second.
Right here?
Why does that bear look like it just got, like, stuck in the ass with, like, a pin or something like that? Like, it's going, ah! It looks like it's in pain. It doesn't even look like it's, like, screaming like a war cry or anything like that. It's just a painful bear.
Dude, that bear is getting a prostate exam. It's going, ah! Like, it's like, dude, I don't think that bear is, like, mad like you're saying. I think that thing's in distress. Someone needs to check in on it.
Got a hold of him.
Oh, no. Oh, man. I'm the doctor. Man, if Hot Dog Man gives you a prostate exam, you feel both hands on your shoulders. There's no, like, there's no just,
whoa,
just,
Jack, whoa.
I'm just saying, man, like, I'm just saying, like, that's how those kinds of things work. That's why you never go and get one from Dr. Hot Dog Man. But moving on from that and down to the Kherson area, we were able to see that some Russian boat forces in the Dnipro River are still getting hit while the water's warm enough to where it hasn't frozen over, because at some points, the Dnipro River will freeze over in some areas, especially the more calmer waters towards the sides of the river. And we can see here the drone coming in and slamming down on the boat forces, and there goes the boat. I guess the Russians need a bigger boat. They should have watched the movie Jaws. Official Lawrence, I think you managed to make the entire audience clinch in a single sentence. Anyone watching the Hot Dog Man's channel feels that feeling every second they're watching it. It's wasted time, and you'll never get those hours back. What's one thing I'm thankful for? I'm thankful I'm not the Hot Dog Man. Like, that's something I think everyone's thankful not to be. We'll have a hit piece put out on us as a Thanksgiving special tomorrow. I'm praying and hoping that'd be a great thing to be thankful for, is another free hit piece. But moving on from that and down to Sevastopol, we were able to see that Belbek airfield was hit by more drones. And it was a spectacle to witness. Check it out. Silence fills the video as we watch the cameraman with checkerboards abound, apparently checkerboards on LSD on the top and bottom of the screen, We can finally hear the explosion. The birds fly away in a dramatic movie for sort of a sense, letting us know that tragedy has stricken the wondrous valley of this Russian Air Force airfield.
You can just hear distant screaming as the birds that'll be eaten on Tuesday fly across the screen.
Man, the seagulls went crazy, man. They heard a loud boom, and they started going like someone's got fries in like 5-mile radius. Moving on from that into the next clip. I think that's a civil dispute going on down the road in the middle of the airfield getting hit. Like, I don't even think that's related to the airfield. That sounds like some sort of abusive relationship going on there. Just some dating advice to the Russians. If that's happening, you need to get out of there, especially in the middle of an airfield attack. But moving on from that and that whole domestic thing that's going on there, I still have no idea. We are going to be moving on up into the area around Kyiv, where we were able to see some anti-aircraft fire shooting down the Shahed overnight. Oh, listen to that 50 cal.
Збиття шахіда.
Було знищення.
Так, було знищення.
Oh, they got it. Look at that.
Bro, huge shout out to the rooster who was manning the gun. It's morning. Like, I don't... Man, that was impressive, though, that they were able to shoot it down. But also, I appreciate the rooster scream.
Yes!
That's the end of that clip, but still, nice to see the air defense at work. Moving on from that, we were able to hear that Ukraine wants more advanced air defense systems. We're not really going to explore that too much because the honest truth is they're not going to get them. The Patriot is the most advanced thing that we can give them without violating national security interests, and for this reason, this is more so just a request to make one, but it will never be fulfilled. However, moving on into Kyiv today, we were able to get the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky a day before Thanksgiving. A great day, a wondrous day, a long-lasting day. And so here's the speech. Speech!
Give me speech.
Здоров'я, шановні українці, українки. Щойно говорив з Марком Рюте, генеральним секретарем НАТО. Вчора відбулася зустріч нашої Ради Україна-НАТО через застосування Росією нової балістичної ракети. Сьогодні з Марком ми обговорили наявні можливості реагування, необхідного посилення ППО України. Я назвав конкретні системи ППО, які нам потрібні, які можуть спрацювати. Ці системи ППО є у партнерів. Дуже важливе рішення саміту НАТО у Вашингтоні щодо ППО і щодо іншого постачання для фронту досі не реалізовані повністю. Ми дуже очікуємо цього, і це значно впливає на мотивацію, на моральний стан наших людей. Нещодавній дозвіл щодо далекобійних ударів по військових об'єктах в Росії допоміг, але тиск на Росію треба підтримувати і збільшувати на різних рівнях, щоб Росія відчувала, що таке війна. Обговорили контакти з нашими партнерами, з Америкою та іншими, нашу скоординовану роботу з ними заради виконання того, про що ми вже домовлялись, і заради потрібного додаткового посилення і військового, і політичного. В тому числі заради запрошення України в НАТО. Це стратегічний політичний крок. Запрошення, на яке наші люди точно заслуговують, яке дійсно може допомогти. Дякую Марку за допомогу і брифінг щодо його комунікації, щодо його перемовин з партнерами. І сьогодні дуже активний день. В цілому було багато зустрічей, зокрема на найвищому рівні у міністра оборони України Умєрова в Республіці Корея. За моїм дорученням Рустем Умєров говорив із президентом Південної Кореї, зі своїм колегою, міністром оборони, також з радником з питань національної безпеки. Коло питань, воно очевидне. Це все, що стосується залучення Росією Північної Кореї у війну проти України, всіх аспектів цього залучення і те, що ми можемо зробити разом. Разом для захисту наших народів і для безпеки наших регіонів. Наявність не лише ракет і снарядів з Північної Кореї в арсеналах Росії, але й солдатів на фронті – це глобалізація війни, на яку пішла Росія, яку тільки глобально можна зупинити. І по поверненню міністра Умєрова я очікую його доповіді щодо перемовин в Сеулі. Була доповідь головкома Сирського, як завжди, по всіх деталях фронтової ситуації та операції в Курській області. Найбільш гарячими напрямками залишаються Донецькі, передусім Курахівський напрямок, найбільше боїв там, найбільш жорстокі штурми. І також Покровський напрямок, Куп'янський. Я вдячний всім нашим підрозділам, кожному солдату, сержанту, офіцеру, які знищують окупанта та забезпечують захист наших позицій. Ще одне. Провів сьогодні нараду з головою уряду Денисом Шмигалем, міністром фінансів України Марченком, представникам Верховної Ради, обговорили основні параметри державного бюджету на наступний рік, нашу фінансову готовність і на цей грудень, і на наступний рік. І домовились, що завтра я підпишу закон про державний бюджет на наступний рік, одразу після того, як закон надійде з Верховної Ради. Головне, всі фінансові потреби України на найближчий час, на наступний рік гарантовані. Вдячний всім, хто працює заради України. Дякую кожному і кожній, хто б'ється заради нашої держави і людей. Слава Україні!
And Heroam Slava. And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 1008 of the war. And that is going to be moving us on into the second segment of this stream, where we get to talk to all of y'all. And what a special kind of a in-stream segment will this be tonight? Well, it will be a very special one, without a doubt, because this is the last question segment that we are going to have before Thanksgiving tomorrow. And of course, many people may be hearing, I don't want a lot for Christmas. There's only one thing I need. And to that, shut the hell up and wait until December 1st. But for everyone else who's normal and actually celebrates Thanksgiving and doesn't go straight from Halloween to Christmas like others, this is an amazing time. And I do want to make sure to let all of y'all know we will not be running a stream tomorrow on the 28th of November. So just know that we will be back the next day and covering the next 48 hours of news from around the world. But beyond that, I hope y'all all have a fun Thanksgiving tomorrow. We still have a lot to go ahead of us here on the stream. We still have so many super chats and so many live chats to answer as well. And Matthew, take it away.
All right. So it's now that time of the night, and hopefully I'm coming through loud and clear and the lag has subsided, at least temporarily, for the time being, until I upgrade to a Windows and get rid of this MacBook, which I think might be the problem. But anyways, moving on to our Super Chat segment, because we're fresh out of polls. Our first one is going to go to Sligois the Sauce, who puts in a $52 donation. And thank you very much, Sligois, for that support. They said, to clarify for everyone wondering, Thanksgiving is the last Thursday in November and not a locked date like the 28th you mentioned, and Christmas at is anticipated date. And anyways, I love the show, and happy holidays to you all. And also, sorry, autocorrect has gone insane.
And that is perfectly fine. I got to thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, and you are correct. That was a misstatement of me earlier. It is the Thursday of the of a certain week in November, and I thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. I don't know why I'm losing my ability to talk, but I have a feeling it has to do with that anthrax spore package I opened up today. But nevertheless, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. I hope that does address that incredibly well, and thank you for correcting me on that, because that was factually incorrect. And so with that, we are on to the next one. Also, before we move on to the next one, I do have to bring this up, though, Matthew. Someone said, breaking news, bombers over Ukraine suspected of carrying a nuclear weapon. I responded to them in the chat, and I simply said, cap. And then they said, okay, good night then. And I'm like, oh, dude, it's cap. It's like, how in the world would you know? How would you know? Like, you don't.
Go get some sleep, brother. Sleep it off. You'll be okay. There's no nukes in those planes.
Dude, we're about to be like the police on the body cams. Okay, look, you're obviously intoxicated. Just go sleep it off. Come out later today, and you'll be fine. Or you're going to jail. Like, I've watched so many of those body cams today. It's been insane. Like, I've had a decent amount of free time today because Matthew was the one who made the midday video, and it was insane how many body cams I watched. But dude, I watched some of them, and they were so funny because people would be throwing tantrums, and the police they would be like, "I'll kill you," and the cops would be like, "Okay, all right, well that's okay, just calm down, like take a breath." No, really? Like, huh?
I would hate to be a cop today. Like, I would really hate it. Like, you know, I know there's some bad cops out there that people are like, oh, like, I hate cops because the cops are bad. I get that because there are some bad ones that give them a bad name. But in general, though, like, the cops deal with so much bullcrap these days. I don't know why anybody would want to become a cop. Like, they don't get paid that good, to be perfectly honest. Most cops don't. I think they make as much as a public school teacher or something like that, which is pretty damn low for what they're dealing with. They're dealing with absolute insanity on a daily basis and also risking their lives. So, to me, that wouldn't be worth it, just to me personally, because they don't really get treated right these days anyway.
Yeah, oh man, like seeing what I was seeing today, because you know, there's the bad cops, and then there's a lot of decent cops out there. Like, that's the thing with most organizations, is that they'll get a bad rap because of a few outliers, but you know, the bad outliers are so bad it ends up tearing down everything. That's kind of how it is with every single institution that is dealing with the government. Like, you know, one or two bad people at every single organization will bring the whole thing down. Like, there's a lot of decently reasonable and knowledgeable representatives and senators in the U.S. government, but people believe that all of them are just these idiots because the few that are idiots are really focused on a lot. And so that's something that always is an issue. But with police, a lot of them have a great deal of patience, like at least from what I'm seeing on body cam footage. And it's like, man, it's patience wasted, because a lot of these people are just messed up. I'd have to say it's bad out there these days. I have a lot of sadness for police because of the amount of stuff, the amount of crap that they have to deal with. It's such an insane amount, and they just get dogged on and dunked on by everyone these days, and they just don't get any respect. Oh man, I'm telling you, oh man, I get no respect around here. I became a police officer to protect the community. Oh man, and the community beat me up. Oh man, I'm telling you. But it's like I don't get how it works these days with that. It's a really crazy thing. But I am glad to hear that the whole well, we won't go into that. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least about the police. But that's why I'm probably going to be referencing the police a good bit tonight and how they act, because I've been watching too much of it in body cam footage. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. Also, I just saw someone start screaming back the blue in the chat. Listen, I'm not one of the people who like gets into the whole like the philosophy thing of stuff, because I'm not a back the blue person. I'm also not an all cops are bastards kind of a person, just to put that out there. Like, I think cops are a necessary and important service to the functioning of basic order and civility on a human-to-human level interaction in the municipalities. It is an important thing for that to happen. At the same time, though, I don't think that all cops are perfect and infallible and they can't do anything wrong, because they do. Like any organization, there are bad eggs out there, and they have to be found and they have to be sussed out. But at the same time, I don't hate cops either, because I understand that they are people like any other, and some of them are going to be bad eggs, some of them are going to be excellent and outstanding cops, but I don't really like to get into the groups that have absolutely colorblind interpretations, because the back the blue folks go into the whole mindset of the cops can never do anything wrong, you know, and you know, they can violate a cop can violate your rights, and they are 100% justified in doing that. And in fact, let's just abolish the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and everything else, because the cops are just blessed angels. And then the other group is like, we hate cops so much, for some reason we want all of them put on a stake and burned at a pyre right now. And I'm like, I don't really get either of these, because it just, you know, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, I like to look at things a lot more rationally, so that's why I don't really get into groups like that, because I respect cops, I really do, and I respect the work they do. It's a very important and integral part of the basic function and foundation of our society. Whether people want to admit that or not, they are a very important part of how basic daily functions are handled, and also how disputes are settled in the public. However, that doesn't mean that they're something I'm going to worship. It doesn't mean it's something I'm going to hate. I respect them, though. I will say that, because it's a very important service that they provide, much like firefighters or any other kind of public service that is done by your rank and file bureaucrats and other form of civil servants that are out there each and every day in this country. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Our next super chat here is going to go to Weatherby Studio, who puts in a $50 donation, and thank you very much, Weatherby, for that very generous support. They said, I'm in Texas, and it's cold on this Thanksgiving Eve, and my wife came out and tried to get me inside because I dropped my wine glass, and I told her I was waiting for your live stream, and it worked. LSA, and actually, my wife is really cool, and happy Thanksgiving. And also, happy Thanksgiving to you, too.
Hey, and it's good to hear that your wife is pretty cool, because I was about to be scared there. I was like, is your wife not okay? But still, Texas is getting kind of cold these days, I've heard. Apparently, y'all are getting hit with really, really cold winters out there that are really damaging the infrastructure these days. And it really does show that infrastructure is made for different kinds of climates. Matthew, remember when that happened? When the extremely cold winter hit Texas, and it pretty much just dunked their energy infrastructure into the abyss where it wasn't working at all, really. And so,
yeah,
you know, and then everyone was going, oh my God, look at how Texas failed them. Like, Texas isn't almost in like a desert-like environment in some areas, and their infrastructure isn't built to deal with incredibly cold winters because that's just not an environmental standard down there. It's like, I always got a huge laugh out of that, because anyone who knows anything would know that if a extremely cold winter hits Texas, it's screwed, because why in the world would the state government put all this money, all this additional expenditure into redundancies that probably would never be used rather than every like 30 to 40 years? It doesn't really make a lot of sense on a tax-paying level and also an expenditure level. And that's something that I always laughed at, is when people say that, or better yet, when people say something like, look, they're running out of water, like out in like out in the actual west in the desert. It's like, well, yeah, it's like there's just too many people out there and there's not enough water for them. It's like, that's not like a failing of the state government to get them enough water. It's a failing of the state government to stop people from moving out there, you know, because there's just too many of them. And also there's way too many agricultural projects that are going on in the west at this point that are also consuming too much water. Like, I don't know why people look at it in weird ways, because it's pretty straightforward when you look at it from any sensible perspective. But nevertheless, moving on from that, though, I do have to say, I hope that y'all are faring well with the winters out there these days. I don't know if it's extremely harsh this time around, but hopefully it's not. But still, thank you so much for waiting for the live stream. And thank you for saying that that worked. And also, it's great to hear that your wife is cool as well. But I got to thank you so much once again for support. Weatherby Studio, you've been around for an incredibly long time. An old guard, as a matter of fact. And I got to thank you so much again for being an old guard of the Lee Spring Army and helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. And so with that, a happy Thanksgiving to you. Thank you once again for the support. And we are on to the next one.
And our next super chat goes to Sligo is the sauce, who puts in a 50 once again, and a huge shout out to you for the second massive support of the night. They said, just to clarify, it is pronounced Sligo is the sauce, and a big thumbs up. And also, I did not know that. I looked at it and I thought, it looks like it's one word at the beginning. I guess there was no space there, indicating it was two different words, but I'm glad we got it right this time. And thank you very much once again for that support. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I gotta thank you, Sligo is the sauce, for clarifying that. And I thank you for the massive support that you threw in additionally right there to clarify that. That helps us to keep this channel running and helps us to clarify. And I saw that Miss Disa put a comment on that saying, thanks for the clarification. And we agree with that. I would concur. Thank you for the clarification. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. Sligo is the sauce. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here is going to go to John Garner, who puts in a 20 as well. And thank you very much, John, for that support. He said, a home, a commodity. No, just a luxury. He said, I spent 8 months homeless, and I'm still here, and got a home now. Oh, very good to hear, by the way. He said, I love my kitchen, and I'm going to gain weight. And that's what I'm talking about. Get the kitchen, gain the weight. That's the way you got to do it. Seriously. But thank you very much, John. And also, I'm very glad to hear that you have a home now, by the way. I'm very glad to hear that. That is very positive news. And once again, thank you for that support. And Enforcer, what say you?
I got to thank you for the support, John Garner. And I got to say that that is terrible to hear that you were homeless for 8 months. That had to have been one hell of a time there trying to deal with being homeless for that long. But it's great to hear that you finally have a home, and it's good to know that you got yourself a nice kitchen and that you're going to gain some weight. I would have to personally recommend the beef bolognese for your cooking, I guess you could say, adventures or endeavors, because beef bolognese is probably one of my favorite dishes these days. I just love the stuff. It's incredibly good, and it's really easy to make. And from what I understand, it's kind of on the more affordable side of things to cook instead of like a beef Wellington or something crazy like that. But nevertheless, I got to thank you so much once again for support. And that is very good to hear, though, John Garner, that you did find yourself a nice home to be in. And I hope you're there for a good long while. And so big thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And also, by the way, let me get this lunatic out of our chat right here. Bye-bye. Goodbye to you, sir. How dare you, sir, junior minister? But anyways, we're moving on here to our next super chat, and this one goes to Fred Mathewson, who puts in a 20. And thank you very much, Fred. He said, what did the ruble situation look like at the fall of the Soviet Union?
Well, that's an interesting question, because you see, the Soviet ruble was never traded on a foreign exchange, so we never really know what it was actually worth. And I don't really think inflation really took off inside of the Russian Federation, well, inside the Soviet Union, when it was collapsing, if I remember correctly, because the Soviet Union had direct control on the value of the ruble. So I don't think it ever inflated rapidly. I may be wrong with that because I don't know a lot about late-term Soviet economic history, so if anyone else knows better, please correct me in the chat, but I don't think there was any rapid inflation at the collapse of the Soviet Union, and that was kind of one of the reasons why the Soviet Union was economically collapsing, is because the currency wasn't really able to adjust with the health of the economy at any given point. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Jody Mandalias, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Jody, for the very generous $20 support. Fantastical. And they said, LSA, LSA, LSA. Thank you for the excellent coverage and analysis. You rock. Take one from the chat, please.
And thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And thank you for saying that we rock. You rock for supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running. And I got to say a massive thanks to you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to be here right now. And we will make sure to take one from the live chat in honor of your 10th super chat, Jody Mandalias. And with that, what do we got, Matthew? What do we got?
All right, so the live chat question here goes to Anonymous, who says, is it within the West's right to place some sort of mine or trigger around these cables to protect them from sabotage?
I think there really isn't a way, because sensors and detectors like that are maybe really expensive to lay out along the length of the cable. I'm not exactly sure, though, on that. And also, I believe these cables are owned by private companies, although they are still a national security prerogative. And so, for that reason, I don't really know if they would ever place those around them, but I don't think there's any of those currently at the moment. They just know when it's been sabotaged, when the comms go down across the cable. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least off of what I would know. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have the days in history with none other than the fine and glorious Gunfox61, who puts in three $20 donations, and once again, that adds up to about $60. Quick mouths. And moving into our first one here, it says 1812, one of the two bridges being used by Napoleon Bonaparte's army crossed the Berezina River, and in 1904, the German colonial army defeats Hottentots at Warm Bad in southwest Africa, and 1909, U.S. troops land in Blue Fields, Nicaragua, as well as in 1936, Great Britain's Anthony Eden warns Hitler that Britain will fight to protect Belgium, and 1922, Allied delegates bar the Soviets from the Near East Peace Conference, and then in 1919, Bulgaria signs the peace treaty with the Allies and shuttle Atlantis, and then in 2001, Hubble Space Telescope discovers a hydrogen atmosphere on planet Osiris. 1959, demonstrators march in Tokyo to protest a defense treaty with the United States. 1950, east of the Choosing River, Chinese forces, and also, I don't know what they did, but question from the chat.
And also, really quickly, I want to make sure that I'm seeing this correctly. So I'm seeing some people say this going to have to shoot this one down really quickly. Some people are saying, oh my God, Ukraine just got nuked. No, they didn't. There's no proof of that anywhere online. I just got to put that out there. Got to put that out there 100% because I'm not wanting people to get panicked in the chat and go, really? No, it didn't happen. So moving on from that, I gotta thank you so much for the massive support, Gunfox61, and also good night to Gunfox61. He actually got off in the middle of the speech, but I still thank you massively for the support and throwing in some days in history. And also, let's see, Hontas, Warm Bad Southwest, 1909, U.S. troops land in Nicaragua. That was actually something that a lot of people don't know about the time before World War I. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand either, is that America never really was one to stay to itself. We were always getting involved in something somewhere at almost every single point in our history. So let me go pull this up. U.S. wars. List of wars involving the United States. Yippee! This is a great one. This is a wonderful one, folks. And so we have them all cut up into U.S. victories, another result, which is a draw, U.S. defeat, and then ongoing conflicts that we're involved in. So as you can see, there were actually a couple of defeats here and there. Very interesting one, because people think America's undefeated. It's not entirely true. But still, beyond that, just to show you all this, look at all of these battles. The First Barbary War, honestly one of my favorites. It's a cult classic. Tecumseh's War, honestly, another cult classic. Pretty good. War of 1812, it was pretty good. I like the uniforms. Overall, war itself, it was all right. Creek War, honestly, another cult classic. Pretty cool. Treaty of Fort Jackson, crazily enough, that was actually signed here in Alabama at Fort Jackson in Wetumpka, Alabama. Pretty cool. But moving on from that, the Nuka-Hiva campaign, honestly, not really a no one. I personally don't really know about it either. Not a cult classic. Second Barbary War, another cult classic. The First Seminole War, now that really is a cult classic. If you know your history, that was a really interesting one. It was like Vietnam before Vietnam, but in the middle of Florida, kind of near Orlando. Really neat one. But let's see here. The Winnebago War, just in case you're wanting something that sounds kind of like the Wendigo. That did happen. But moving on.
That's when the RVs went head to head with one another. They got the sleeper car going up against the little mini RV, and they were bashing it out there. Bing, bing, bing.
Man, and let's see. Let's see here. The Winnebago, which were also called the Ho Chunks. I don't know what that name means, but that's a very interesting name. So anyways, moving on from that, there was the Black Hawk War, Second Seminole War, the Texas Comanche Wars, which lasted for decades, the Battle of Drummond's Island, which was a very interesting one, the Mexican-American War, of course, a cult classic, the Cayuse War, the Apache Wars, the Navajo Wars, the Battle of Muddy Flat, Bleeding Kansas, the Puget Sound War, which was a very interesting one, because that one actually, I believe, occurred, well, actually, hang on, no, I'm getting that one incorrect. Well, whatever. It doesn't matter. Anyways, the Third Seminole War, the Yakima War, the Second Opium War. We were actually involved in that, guys. We actually got involved in a war over opium on opium's side. That was the war on drugs before the war on drugs happened, and we were on the side of drugs. I gotta say, really cool time. But nevertheless, there was the Utah War, and I believe that was actually the United States fighting the Mormons. Oh yeah, that did happen. I forgot about that. But anyways, moving on from that, just to let y'all know, this was a cool one. Brigham Young was actually the governor of the Utah Territory until the United States went out there and literally overthrew him in a war. That's what this whole Utah war thing is about. So then they removed him as governor and had a new guy replace him. Anyways, there was the Reform War, the Pig War. Oh, this one was great, y'all. This one was absolutely great. So basically, the entire thing happened because this British lord in the area that was inside of the, let's see, what was it called at the time? The Dominion of Canada, that's what it was called. He had a pig that he really loved. He loved this pig a lot, really a lot. And so the pig wandered off into the American side of the territory, and an American farmer was sick and tired of this thing eating its crops. So he shot the pig, and then over the next 2 months, he shot and killed the pig, by the way. I forgot to mention that he killed the pig. But over the next 2 months, the British in the United States, without either of their governments knowing, built up so many forces into this area, it was about to turn into a full-blown war over the death of this pig. No joke. It was actually stopped. The entire thing was stopped once the U.S. Federal government and the British central government in London figured out what was happening. It was all, of course, put away or kind of put to peace, and then they divided up the territory properly, which is how the borders in the Puget Sound area up here exist today. We ended up getting all of these islands, which was pretty sick. Like, honestly, like, we shot a pig and then we got land. Like, that was actually kind of a good arrangement there. But nevertheless, moving on from that, down a little bit further, there was John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, technically considered a conflict, actually, because it was a separate uprising, but it only consisted of one guy, and he ended up, kind of getting killed really easy. But still, that was the thing that happened. There was the First and Second Cortina War. That actually was a completely separate thing. That was not the U.S. Civil War. And crazily enough, it was actually it was a very interesting kind of a conflict because it was kind of like a crossover before the main event. It was kind of like the movie that led up to the more successful movie afterwards, because the United States and the Confederate States, along with Mexico, all teamed up to go fight pretty much one of the cartels at the time called the Cortinista Bandits. And we all ended up winning. And then we ended up all killing each other in the Civil War right after that, so like that little friendship didn't last too long. And then we had the Yavapai Wars, which was another war against Native American tribes, including the Yavapai, Apache, Yuma, and the Mojave. And then we had the Dakota War of 1862, and then we had the first battle of Shinnonoseki Straits, which was once again kind of out in the Washington area. And then we had the Colorado War, the Snake War, the Powder River War, the Red Clouds War, the Formosa Expedition, the Comanche Campaign, the United States Expedition to Korea, where we tried to open them up to trade. We didn't really succeed. We ended up getting in a war with the Kingdom of Korea, technically, and we ended up dominating. Like, I don't think any Americans were really killed in large numbers, but we ended up killing hundreds of Korean soldiers, and then they just said, screw you, we're still not trading, and then we left. So that didn't really turn into anything. But moving on from that, there was the Modoc War, the Red River War, the Las Cuevas War, the Great Sioux War of 1876, the Buffalo Hunters War, the Nez Perce War, the Bannock War, the Cheyenne War, the Sheep Eater Indian War, the Victorios War, the White River War, the Egyptian Expedition, which was kind of like a conflict in itself because we beat Egypt's ass, like, in this whole, like, aside thing that was really weird. Not really important. The Crow War, the Ghost Dance War, the Garza War, the Yaqui Wars, the Second Samoan Civil War, which we got involved in, and we actually ended up fighting the German Empire a little bit in that one before World War I. Pretty cool. The Spanish-American War, we beat Spain's ass. Pretty neat, pretty fun. Teddy Roosevelt, Rough Riders, all that cool stuff. San Juan Hill, we turned Cuba into an independent country. We also got the Philippines as a territory. Pretty cool. The Philippine-American War, once we got the Philippines, the Filipinos hated us. They went to war with us. We ended up winning that war. And that's why the Philippines was a territory all the way up until World War II. And then there was the Moro Rebellion, the Boxer Rebellion, which was a really cool one as well, but we won't go into that one. That was literally like the whole world teamed up against the Boxers, which was a really interesting event. And then we haven't even gotten into the 20th century. But I'm not going to bore y'all with just listing off all of these wars. The whole point, though, that I'm trying to get out here, if y'all just listen, I'm just kidding, but the whole point I'm trying to get out here is that America has never not been involved in a war. We've almost been in a war pretty much every single day that America's been in existence, in some place, somewhere. And the U.S. forces landing in Nicaragua was sort of an extension of that, because the United States has always been heavily involved in Central America, really since it broke away from New Spain way back at the very beginning of the 1800s. We've always been down there in some way, shape, or form, especially south of Mexico and just north of South America. So anywhere in between Guatemala to Panama, we are always heavily involved in this area. So it's a really interesting thing to know that today, this day in 1909, we entered Nicaragua, because that would not be the only time. Actually, funnily enough, another little rabbit hole here that y'all might be interested in is that the first combat experience that the Tommy gun ever got in U.S. military service was actually in Panama. Pretty cool. But
that is pretty cool. While you lag for a solid 30 seconds. Thank you, Mac.
Man, Mac is wonderful. Big thanks to Mac. Shout out to Mac. Big Mac. Long-lasting Mac. But nevertheless, I hope y'all do enjoy this whole little summary here of American war history, because there's just so many others. Like this one, the Mexican border war. You see what happened at the time, to put this one out there. This was a crazy one. Like, I could never see this happening. But the American and Mexican border was pretty much uncontrolled, and there was a whole bunch of crime flowing over the Mexican border in the very early 1900s. And so the U.S. government had enough, and they actually sent down the U.S. Army to pretty much exert direct control over the American border, and also to deal with an incredibly dangerous cartel that was flooding over the border and beginning to control certain areas on the American side of the border that was run by Pancho Villa and and his gang of bandits. Interestingly enough, this was kind of like the prelude to everyone who was ever important in U.S. military history was kind of involved in this thing at the beginning of the 21st century, because George Patton was the first guy to mount a machine gun to a Ford Model T, and he ended up gunning down Pancho Villa's right-hand man from the back of a Ford Model T with a machine gun. Kind of a cool story, but nevertheless, that was an actual thing that happened, and it was a really crazy kind of a conflict. But nevertheless, we pretty much wiped out Pancho Villa's gang of bandits and pretty much secured the American-Mexican border from the massive amount of crime that was seeping across it because of the almost absolute lack of control. And so, moving on from that, we also had this whole little race war thing that also happened with Cuba. That's kind of when we went down and kind of crushed the Cuban government because it's getting out of control. No one ever brings that up, but that was kind of one of the reasons why Fidel Castro actually had a good bit of support from the Cuban people in the uprising, is because we went down there a lot and would just crush whatever we didn't like. And that ended up pissing off the Cuban people a good bit, obviously, and so that's why we didn't really have good relations with the Cubans in the long run. But there were so many. There were so freaking many. I mean, it's actually a crazy thing when you talk about U.S. military history, because there are so many little things that have happened beyond the big wars that everyone always talks about. There were so many little things that happened, and we actually had to learn about a lot of these conflicts in college, because I actually took some U.S. military history courses in college, so you would learn a lot about some of the other smaller conflicts that the armed forces were involved in, which was a very interesting thing. But still, I hope y'all do enjoy these little stories. And also, Matt Max said the first USA Air Force roundel was a red star. I've never seen that before. I would have to look. I'm kind of doubting that, though, because I remember it being a roundel, and it was just a... Let me go look at this. U.S. Army Air Corps. Let's go here. United States Army Air Corps. Nope, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it, because... Hang on. Here we go. So, if you're talking about this one, this isn't really a red star. This was just the, like, the Army Signal Corps. Oh, hang on, let me go look at the actual name, because I always remember it as the Army Air Corps. This is the United States Army Air Service emblem right here from 1919 to 1941. But then the Army Air Corps was created, and then that's when we saw the more modern roundel. But this was our original roundel in World War I. Kind of looked a lot like the French roundel. Just a little bit different, pretty much the same color tones and everything, because we were literally just taking French aircraft and painting our own roundels onto them and then having them flown by American pilots, because that's how the U.S. Air Force was technically born, was out of the Army Air Service and then the Army Air Corps, which then got separated from the Army into its own branch. But we started with no real American aircraft. Pretty much everything we used in World War I, which was the first time the Army Air Service or any kind of an air service really existed in U.S. military history, we were using nothing but French and British equipment. There was nothing American in it at all, which is crazy now because it's flipped the other way, and a lot of what British weaponry is on board their aircraft in modern day is all American, and a lot of the stuff that we have here in the United States is 100% American. So it's really interesting to see how much we evolved our air forces from its humble beginnings when we were having to literally get loaners from the French to now to where everything is American made and people buy our aircraft around the entirety of the world. But still, moving on from that, let me show y'all the Army Air Corps roundel. This was the Army Air Corps roundel, and then I think later on it evolved. I'm trying to make sure that I get the sequence correct, because that was not the only Army Air Corps roundel. They had one later that pretty much looked just like the modern U.S. Air Force's roundel. It's just that it removed the red stripe. And let me go see if I can show y'all the red stripe I'm talking about here. They don't have it? What? Oh, wait a minute. That's because I didn't put in the U.S. Air Force. Sorry, everyone. Let me go put in the U.S. Air Force. There we go. And this is the roundel I'm talking about right here. But one of the later versions that they had, I believe from 1943 to 1946, was this roundel right here as you're seeing it. But this red stripe in the white field on both sides of the star was removed. So it was a solid white field within these sides of the roundel. So that's kind of an interesting fact, I guess, if you're ever interested in Air Force iconography and roundels. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And I thank you so much once again for support, Gunfox61. And I hope you got the rabbit hole you were looking for. That was a legend of a rabbit hole right there. And I hope people really enjoyed that one. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Zyper Sniper 1, who's also a channel legend and puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Zyper Sniper, for that support. He said, coffee fund for the enforcers and have a wonderful Thanksgiving tomorrow, USA. And a question to the chat, please.
Hey, and thank you so much for the support, and thank you for the coffee fund, and thank you for wishing us a happy Thanksgiving. We are always happy to have a happy Thanksgiving. We love having happy Thanksgivings. Who doesn't want a happy Thanksgiving? And so I got to thank you so much for the support. And Matthew, did he want a live chat?
He did. He wanted a live chat question while my voice cracks terribly there. And this live chat question goes to DW, who says, if Russia falls, what do you see NATO doing in regard to nukes and Russian control?
That's a great question. That's an incredible question, actually, because we actually have a perfect historical precedent to know what they would do. They would do nothing. NATO can never operate offensively, and that's been known since the inception of NATO in 1949, if I'm correct. That's when NATO was founded. Or it was 1947, I'm not really sure. And y'all can correct me on whichever one's right. But nevertheless, since NATO's been founded, it's always been defensive. And when the Soviet Union was collapsing before NATO's very eyes, we did nothing. There was nothing we could do. NATO can never operate in an offensive manner. Sure, countries that make up NATO, like the United States, can operate on an offensive manner on its own, but it's on its own. So what we did when the Soviet Union collapsed is we realized that the nuclear weapons were in a very dangerous condition. There was no control, there was really no law or order inside the Russian Federation, and these nuclear weapons could easily disappear or be poorly maintained to the point that it causes massive ecological damage. And so what we decided to do is that we would pay the Russians money to go into Russia and deactivate the nuclear weapons and nuclear submarines and anything nuclear related that they could no longer operate on their own, or we would simply go and do something else entirely different, which was to quite literally just ask the Russians, could you please, pretty please keep them and just not let them fall into hands of questionable people. That's all we would do. There was really nothing else we could do. And that's something that a lot of people don't know, is that that's really how the United States has an understanding of how modern Russian weapon systems work that are from Soviet times, is because we went into Russia and the Russians literally paid us to dismantle these systems, some of them. And so while we were dismantling them, we of course had people there who were learning every single thing they could about the system and how they probably work in theory. So that's probably what we would do again. If the Russian Federation collapsed, the new government that would come forward would be in dire economic straits, just like the Soviet Union. And we would probably offer the exact same alternative. We would say, please, pretty please, don't lose the nuclear weapons. Don't let them fall into the hands of groups like ISIS-K or some other crazy group like that. And also, if you have no money to be able to maintain these nuclear weapons and they're about to fall into disrepair, or you just don't know where they're going to go, let us know, and we will pay you money to go in there and get rid of these nuclear systems for you. That's probably what we would end up doing. It doesn't sound like a cool answer, because it would be a lot more cool just to say we would march in and get rid of all of their nuclear weapons, but there is a historical precedent to work off of, and that's the exact way it went last time. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. Thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to LSA Sergeant Figment, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, LSA Sergeant Figment, for that support. He said, LSA, smash the like button. That's an order. And today is my 1001st day as a member of the LSA, a proud veteran and sergeant of the LSA. And I salute every one of you for your support to the enforcers in Ukraine, and slove Ukraine.
Hey, congratulations, LSA Sergeant Figment, for this being your 1001st day. You joined the channel on the 7th day of the war, the first week, actually. That is old guard by definition, LSA Sergeant Figment, and I gotta say that it is absolutely incredible to still have you here. One of the proud veterans of the LSA, a sergeant of the LSA, as a matter of fact, and I gotta say, thank you so much for saluting every one of the people in the LSA and Matthew and me for what we've been doing in support of American and Western interests around the globe. We thank you so much, because you've been one of the folks who's been here for an incredibly long time and supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running, and I gotta thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it was not for folks like you, we would have never been able to make this thing possible. And so with that, thank you so much once again. Long live the Lee Spring Army, and of course, last but not least, we will make sure to move on to the next one. But still, thank you so much once again. And Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so our next super chat here goes to LMVG, who puts in a $20 donation, and thank you very much, LMVG, for that support. I don't see here any type of deal about also what. Let me see what this person's deal is
Don't
right
ban
here in
him.
this live chat.
Don't ban him.
Hold
I
on.
see him, and don't ban him. Oh no, Matthew, no, no.
I didn't ban him.
Oh wait a minute, you didn't? You didn't? What did you do?
No.
Oh
I just
wait.
gave him a timeout.
Oh, okay. Well, dang it, man. I was about to engage with him, man. Look at him. They're like a freaking rage baiter. You sat there and went, "Whoa, Jack, this is a joke." They're like, "Did it hurt your feelings, Snowflake? Huh?" I was like, "Dude, like, I was about to ask, what do you mean I'm wrong?" Like,
Snowflake, man. Don't come at me tonight. I'm feeling testy over this MacBook, man. I'm ready to throw down.
Man, you're about to be like Mike Tyson. You're gonna be like, "You have to go. I hope you understand." Like,
I'm not gonna lie. I'm feeling like Mike tonight. I've about had enough of this shit. I need this MacBook to work right. Why won't that Wi-Fi work right? It really gives me my feels.
But also, while ERP Thompson Queen, who's apparently a sweet queen, is in timeout, I just gotta let you formulate your answer once you get out of timeout. They said your comments about the energy grid in Texas were ignorant. Okay, so let me explain this. You have 200 characters in each message that you send, and I find it very interesting that you only used about 80 of them to say that, and then did not use the remaining 120 to explain how I'm wrong. Because if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be wrong. Maybe you know more than me on that, but considering that you just said I'm wrong, period, I'm sure that you probably don't even know how I'm wrong. But when you get out of timeout, I order you, actually, to get back in the live chat and explain to me how I'm wrong about the energy infrastructure of Texas. If it sounds reasonable, I will look into it and I might find out I'm wrong. If you sound stupid, then you'll probably get banned. I'm sorry, but just cutting it down to its basics, that's how this works now. So we are playing a fun game, you and me here, Thompson Queen. And so I hope you come back in the chat and slay Queen for your sake, or else you will be banned. And so with that, Matthew, what was the next super chat that we had?
All right, so real quick to return back to this one, it's LMVG. You put in that 20, and they did not leave a comment, but thank you very much, LMVG, for throwing that in. And also, sorry about you being rudely interrupted by that individual in the live chat. It came in so rudely, interrupting everything with that horribleness right there, that nastiness, coming in here with all that, like Peskov or something. But anyways, thank you very much for that support. And with that, we're moving on to our next one, which goes to Anthony Plymel, who puts in a 20. And thank you very much, Anthony, as well for the support. He said, "I'm sorry, I joined."
First super chat they've ever made to the channel.
First super chat ever. I didn't even see that, man. And also, huge shout out to Anthony for that first ever super chat. He said, "Sorry, I joined the chat late. And does Putin have to go through the same launch procedure when launching a non-nuclear IRBM, such as issuing the launch codes, etc., like he would when launching a nuclear ICBM?"
And I got to thank you for the support. And that is a very good question. And thank you for your first super chat to the channel ever. And let's see. No, he doesn't have to go through the same process of launching a non-nuclear weapon. Non-nuclear weapons largely can be used at the discretion of the actual generals of the Russian armed forces. So things like Iskanders, such things like that, that can all be largely dealt with at the level of the MOD, and that doesn't really have to touch Putin's desk. So there doesn't have to be this massive and rigorous sort of an authorization process to launch a conventional weapon. And so I hope that does answer that question well. Thank you so much for the support. And better late than never is what I say. I'm sure you're probably getting ready for Thanksgiving, and I hope you have a fun time tomorrow. And thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we would not be able to make this thing possible. And so a huge thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, by the way, folks, I think I've got a solution to the entire problem with the computer. I've been thinking it through over here as I've been seething about the MacBook issues and constantly and never going away. I think what I will do is I will have to return this MacBook that I'm currently on because I'm just not satisfied with it because the lag is still persisting. I'm beginning to think it is a MacBook issue. I think I could downgrade this MacBook and use the other funds from downgrading to actually get a decent PC, a desktop PC, a Windows one, and run the stream off of that and also edit my videos on the MacBook still, because I would really miss editing on the MacBook because it's really good for that. So that might actually fix the problem and also not make me have to spend a crap load of money to get two different PCs, because I don't want to do that. That's a crazy amount of money, and we can't be outputting that kind of money on the computers because it's just too much. And I think Apple stuff's overpriced. So the fact that you can return a MacBook and then get a PC and a smaller MacBook tells you quite a bit about how Apple's pricing their stuff. But nonetheless, we are moving on here after that small little rant and moving on to our next super chat, which goes to Snow White, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Snow White, for that support. They said, "Happy Turkey Day, mad respect, brothers."
And thank you so much for the support, Snow White, and thank you for the happy Turkey Day. It's 15 minutes in our time zone before we reach Turkey Day, and I got to thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because folks like you make it possible for us to have a turkey on Turkey Day. We're not going to be like Tiny Tim with the itty-bitty little turkey. We're going to have the big turkey, baby. But still, thank you so much for your support. I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Adam McLean, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Adam, for that support. He said, what is the difference between tariffs and sanctions in the international economy?
Tariffs and sanctions. Tariffs and sanctions are different. Sanctions are a form of economic punishment inflicted by one nation against another, as a way to say, I don't like an action that you've made that's completely unrelated to our trade. I just don't like it, and therefore I'm punishing you. The tariffs are different. Tariffs are meant to say something like, I don't like, for example, tariffs can be very selective. That's something that a lot of people don't know. Like, nowadays people say tariffs in a very blanket statement, like, I'm going to put a tariff on China. And you can make tariffs a lot more selective. You could say, like, this is something that a lot of people don't know, is that there's actually a tariff on foreign sugar that's existed in America for well over 100 years at this point. That's why we use corn syrup in America and not sugar, is because foreign sugar companies, like the ones in Cuba, to once again tie together the whole Cuban-American relation thing that I was talking about earlier, Cuban sugar was made extremely cheap. Cuba was a pretty crappy country even back then, not going to lie. And the companies that were down there that were running their sugar companies would pretty much use the Cuban workers pretty crappily, not really pay them a lot, and that meant that Cuban sugar was way cheaper than any sugar ever made in America. And there's not really a lot of places in America that are conducive, well, in the United States, that are conducive to growing any kind of sugar cane, or, you know, processing any sugar cane into sugar. So for this reason, most of it was done in Cuba. The problem was, however, is that the local sugar producers in America had a little bit of lobbying power, and so they decided to use their lobbying power in the U.S. government to have the U.S. government, by an act of Congress, impose a tariff on the Cuban sugar trade. And so that became a international, worldwide thing. Every single bit of sugar that comes from anywhere outside the United States has, I believe, a 20% tariff put on it, or it's a 15% tariff, but it's a fairly high one. And so what happened is that most products made of sugar in America pretty much became impossible to make overnight because the sugar became so expensive to get. There's not enough sugar being produced in America, so it becomes incredibly expensive because the demand is extremely high, but the supply is really low, and then getting sugar from outside the country becomes uncompetitive because it becomes so expensive. So then what many companies did in the United States is that they turned to the next best thing. Tastes very similar. It's incredibly cheap because we have an unlimited amount of this. It's corn syrup. And corn syrup has been around since about 1812 or so. It's been around forever. But it really started to be used in the modern day to try and make sure that the sugary kinds of drinks and stuff that exists in America could still be made, but without actual cane sugar, which is something that was not available in large supply any farther from that point. And that's why in America we have this huge thing of using corn syrup when you could easily use sugar. That's something that there's a whole interesting sort of a thing going on with that, but that's kind of an example of a tariff, is that America said, hey, we don't like this one kind of an item, this one time type of a good moving into our country because it's really killing a local kind of an industry or a business. So for this reason, we're putting a tariff on it to stop trade with those countries. And that's something that a lot of people don't know, is that tariffs are not something to easily throw around. A lot of people like to kind of throw that idea around everywhere. Everyone's like, oh, let's put tariffs on China, let's put tariffs on Mexico or Canada. And that is a detrimental kind of a thing, to be entirely honest, to an economy, because for example, with Canada and Mexico, which are our two biggest trading partners in the modern day, that honestly would do pretty bad economic damage to the United States, because there's no way to be able to get those products at affordable prices, and then there's also no substitute any farther. So the prices directly passed down to the consumers that are going to be buying the product, because the companies that are getting stuff from Canada and Mexico are getting it from there because that's the only place that they can get it at a cheap price. There's no competitor in America that could do it, or there's no competitor that even exists to do it. So then say a 20% tariff is put on, and now they're having to still get these products from Canada and Mexico because there is no domestic production of it, and there will not be probably for a good 10 years at that point. And then you are buying the product at a 20% up hike from what it originally was as a consumer. It's not really a good practice to just start throwing out tariffs blanket wholesale over everything. But as far as sanctions are concerned, sanctions are done on a completely different level. Like, for example, with America, like, we really don't have a lot of economic dealings with Russia, even pre-war, but with Russia invading Ukraine, we said, we don't like that, therefore we're sanctioning you from doing any trade with the United States. So a whole bunch of industries that we have in America, like the services sector, were completely barred from doing any business with Russia, at least technically. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and I thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible and keep this channel running. And so with that, also, I saw Michael Thomas say, cane sugar is grown in Florida. Yes, but not in the numbers required to make it possible for most things in America to be produced with real sugar instead of corn syrup. And that's why they shifted to corn syrup in the past, because even now, like, this is something interesting, even now, a lot of the major companies do understand that cane sugar is qualitatively better and preferred by the American consumer over corn syrup. However, it is just financially infeasible to produce American products with cane sugar or any kind of real sugar products, because it simply would outpace the amount of supply per the demand, and that means that those sugary kinds of products would become far more expensive because they're having to pay out of the ass to get the sugar at that point, because everyone in America is going to the same sugar providers in Florida and having to spend out the kazoozle to get the limited amount of sugar that there would be. Otherwise, you would have to go and get it from another country that produces sugar somewhere in the Caribbean, and then you would have to pay an extremely high tariff to get that in, and then at that point that product is no longer economically viable, because the sale point, the actual price for that good at the stores, would be way more than your competitors, and people would not buy that product because most consumers will always buy the cheapest product when given the option. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least on the business side of things, on why that doesn't really work too well. Like, yes, it is true, and I was talking about that earlier. Yes, sugar is produced in America, but it's just simply not in the amounts required to upkeep the sugar industries, the sugary products industries of America. That's why they revert to corn syrup on almost all instances, even knowing that the American consumer has a craving for real sugar, not corn syrup. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Good point, though. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to John Garner yet again, who puts in another $20 support. And huge shout to you, John, for the second support of the night. And we really do appreciate it. He said, "Dear Santa, I don't need anything this year. I have all I want. I have the LSA. And thanks to all of you."
Hey, and that's really nice of you. I gotta thank you so much for the support and saying such kind words, John Gunna, and helping this channel to keep on running. And of course, long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die. And thank you so much once again for being one of the old guards of this channel, because you've been around for an incredibly long time. And so with that, huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Neo Construct, who puts in a 20. And thank you very much as well for that support. He said, "How likely Russia would attack Finland? And thank you for the awesome streams." Excuse me, and keeping the information flowing, and great stuff to listen to on my morning shift. And much love from Finland.
And hello to Finland. The chances of Russia attacking Finland are practically non-existent, and I hope that puts some fears to rest, because y'all are a part of the most powerful military alliance, the most powerful military, really, when you think about it, that has ever been seen on the face of this planet. The Roman Empire would envy the kind of armed force that NATO has in the modern day. And them really, the Roman Empire was probably one of the most impressive armed forces that we've ever seen on the face of the world in history beyond the 20th century and the 21st century. There is nothing that compares to NATO. And considering that Finland is in NATO, there is no way in hell the Russians would be stupid enough to do that. And if they ever did that, they would seriously regret it very quickly. So I would say that the chances of Finland ever being invaded by the Russian Federation in the near future is slim to none. And when I mean slim, I'm talking about less than 1%. It's probably less than 0.5%, to be entirely honest, or it's next to zero. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, and I thank you so much once again for support. And that's why joining NATO is such a huge benefit, because countries like yours that used to be neutrally aligned and not a part of NATO can now live fairly surely that the Russians will never invade them, because they have not only the Swedes, the Norse, the Baltics, Poland, and pretty much all of Eastern Europe backing them up in the immediate sense of an invasion. You also have Big Daddy America, Britain, France, and Germany that are also backing you up as well. So I would highly doubt it that the Russians would ever invade Finland. And also, thank you so much for enjoying the show all the way from one of the incredibly cool and beautiful Scandinavian nations. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Steve T, who puts in at 20 and says, if you knew the world was falling apart tomorrow, what would you get for your last meal, dinner and dessert? And in New Zealand, we have dessert pizza from Hell Pizza, and it's better than you'd think. I would like to try that, by the way, a dessert pizza. That sounds kind of interesting. But for my last meal, I would pick this. I would go for the Buffalo Wild Wings Mango Habanero 30-pack. I'd also get maybe a side of macaroni. I'd also get maybe a pizza and maybe, let's see here, maybe a steak or something like that. Last meal and also dessert, I'd probably go for maybe like a brownie or something, to be honest. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say, that's a tough one because there's so much good food out there, you know? Dang. If I had to pick something, I would say it would be that beef rigatoni I was talking about earlier. I'm craving a beef rigatoni, I'm not going to lie. I would have a beef rigatoni, and I would have a side with the beef rigatoni of macaroni and cheese. That's never one that fails. Macaroni and cheese is always good. And then I would have a dessert of... Let me think. That's a tough one, too, because there's a lot of good desserts out there. You know what? I'm going to keep it simple. Vanilla ice cream from Bluebell, because that is that never misses, with milk on it. So that way, like, it gets that nice little frozen crust on it. So that would be my meal. Very simple meal. But I never believe in last meals, really. Like, last meals are great and all, but at the same time, it's like, you know, if I'm about to die, I'm kind of just missing out on all flavors from that point forward. So I'm like, you know, what's the point? But if I had to pick a last meal, it would be that. It would be beef rigatoni with a side of macaroni and cheese, and then to finish it all off, just a nice bowl of vanilla ice cream from Bluebell. Like, that would be honestly the best. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address that incredibly well, and a really interesting and creative question there. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to, guess who? It's Mitchell Halverson. Halverson. I don't know why I had such a hard time with that last name, but thank you very much, Mitchell, for that $20 support. And he said, I'm a little late to the stream, but do you think that the upcoming president will mess with Russia's economy because they want to make peace, and Russia's economy is now a wartime economy, and glory to the LSA?
I would say... I don't really think that he's going to be helping. I would think that he's probably going to be screwing over the Russians a little bit more. And what's crazy is that we were saying that a little while ago when actually, we weren't saying that a little while ago. We've been saying that really for the entirety of this year since that became a question. And people would always beat us over the head when they said that. Well, when we said that, they'd be, oh, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And now it seems like the entire world is finally starting to agree with what we've been saying, because it doesn't look like anything's going anywhere with the new president coming in. And that was all just, you know, hype talk, I suppose, by some people. But I would assume that the Russian economy is probably going to be doing as badly, if worse. And if they piss off the incoming president, we may even see the Ukraine support is increased or stays the same as it was before. That's what we're expecting at the moment, and that's largely what I would have to give as an answer. Like we've always been saying for a year now, doesn't matter what president's in charge. Sometimes when things are just a matter of importance to the United States, they go the same either way. People don't like to hear that because some people like to think that their political party is special and precious and different. But when it comes down to it, at the basic level, when you boil it all down, they're fairly similar in almost every aspect. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And I hope that does address the question. I thank you once again for support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one is going to go to Duncan VR, who puts a $16 donation. And thank you very much, Duncan, for the support. He said, Bamuba, inshallah. Baba, meow, 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 inshallah. He said, we will get the hot dogs, Baba, woof. Oh, man, I'm telling you, that Simon fly makes you want to go and upchuck, oink, oink, quack. Oh, man, inshallah. Oh, man, I'm telling you, Baba, meow.
I gotta thank you so much, Duncan VR, for the inshallah. But still, I gotta thank you so much for the support, Duncan VR, and the animal noises. I gotta thank you massively for supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running. And Oh my goodness. The hot dog man. What is he doing right now? You know what? Like, I bet you he's going to be having a very quiet Thanksgiving, considering that no one has anything to do with him.
Oh
So
man, he's flopping harder than a carp.
let's see here. Oh, dude, look, he finally listened to our advice. You see, like, I'm glad that we could help him out because we told him that, well, we told him here on this stream that deleting streams is stupid because it doesn't help you out. It actually hurts you in the algorithms. So I guess he finally listened. And now we can see the true viewership he's getting, which is like less than 6,000 on most streams. So, hey, that's great. Anyways, moving on from that, I would have to say thank you so much for the animal noises, Duncan VR. If it wasn't for folks like you, we would never have a normal LSA night. And I got to thank you so much once again for support, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to be here right now. And so thank you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Reegs36, who puts in a 15, and thank you very much for the support. They said, really appreciate you guys, and a question is, if there is a time, is there a frontline collapse for the Russians possible in the next couple of months?
And I thank you so much for the support, and thank you so much for the kind words. And to answer your question, I don't think so unless if there was an economic collapse. At this point, my honest belief is that it truly is World War I out there on the front lines. The past year and a half has backed that up entirely. Neither side is able to gain offensive victories. The only victories that are to be had now are in the defensive. And so for this reason, I don't really think there will be a frontline breakthrough by the Ukrainians. If they did it, it would be an absolute miracle, and I would be blown away. And I would really have to applaud the Ukrainians for their great strategy and implementation of battlefield tactics. But at the same time, I just don't think that's possible. I think the only way that the Russian front line is going to collapse at this point is by severe economic pressure crushing the Russians, and then because of that the armed forces are no longer able to function due to a lack of funds and also due to the lack of a focused central government inside of Russia. I hope that does answer that fairly well, and thank you so much once again for helping this channel to keep on running. And also, let's see here. Also, Tommy Two Turn said it shouldn't be a competition, fellas. That's not really a competition with Hot Dog Man. I mean, Hot Dog Man like fell off like a year and a half ago, and he's just fallen off. So we just talk about the Hot Dog Man from time to time because the Hot Dog Man is a very memorable person. If you ever ran into him directly and had to deal with him, you would not forget him either, because he's a very sick individual. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And also, I want to just make this fairly clear as well, Tommy Two Turn, is that I'm not one of those people who acts like, hey, look, I'm going to overlook that you doxed us and tried to have us swatted at our law school and possibly shot by the cops and a whole bunch of other things just because the guy happens to be trying to say that he's pro-Ukrainian whenever it benefits him. I'm not one of those kind of people. I'm sorry. Like, if someone does something to me that's messed up, I don't care if I agreed with them on a point earlier or not. That's messed up. I feel like that's how people should be. Instead of sitting there and being like, you know, like, for example, like we were talking about earlier, one of the bad egg cops who are like, hey, that cop just wrongfully shot someone, but since we're both cops, I'm going to cover for him and make sure that that doesn't see the light of day. Or, you know, anyone else who's in the government who's like, this person's doing insider trading, but I'm not going to blow the whistle on this because we're friends. We're both representatives together, so I'm going to allow this corruption to continue to slide. I'm not one of those people at all. Ever. Never will I be. Someone can be on the same side as me, and if I see them doing something wrong, I'm not going to like that. If they do something wrong to me, and then they want to act like that's justified, I'm never going to let that go either, because that's messed up and wrong. Like I'm not one of those people who's wishy-washy with my moral beliefs, and so I go, well, you know, this guy likes, you know, Alabama football team, and I do too, you know, and he was a drunk driver and just ran someone over and killed him. But when the cops ask me if I saw it, I'm going to say, no, I didn't see it. You know, because we're both on the same side. No, it's not like that. It should never be like that. Because if you ever go to that level where you're willing to let your morality slide and what's right and wrong slide just because you agree with someone on something, you may be the reason why there are things wrong in this world, like corrupt cops, corrupt politicians, people who do the wrong things because they think they can get away with it because they're in a little clique and an inside group. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, or at least my stance on that. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Quantum Fighter, who puts in a $10 donation. And thank you very much, Quantum Fighter, for that support. He said all Nordic and Baltic countries and Poland met to discuss a joint military cooperation, air, land, sea, and also INT. And do you think they will be able to integrate their forces adequately to be able to defend the region?
I think that they can. NATO is a great apparatus for combining forces and really getting them standardized. So I would say without a doubt, yes, because really within the larger NATO framework, they'll already be integrated properly enough. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Khan, who puts in a 10 and says, 20 times the G-force, Putin's hypersonic missiles doesn't mean the nuclear payload they are carrying can take 20 times the G-force. And the Sarmat, the Satan II, can the payload survive? And I've seen a lot of failures.
I don't really think the Sarmat can survive at all, to be entirely honest. We've seen it fail on the pad so many times. I just don't ever think it will be a usable weapon system even well on into the next 5 years. And by then, Russia will probably be in such bad straits, that program will also be abandoned, much like really any other program they've had going on. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible and keep it running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And also somebody in the live chat said something about trying to get that bag. And I said, getting that bag. And then I saw a Monster Lab pop up and give me the terminology translation here from the Urban Dictionary. He said, bag is slang for getting lots of money. Monster Lab, I will say this. I grew up in this century. Like I do know the lingo, like a little bit of piece of it here and there. I didn't know what getting that bag means. But I was curious. I'm like, what bag is he talking about? I didn't know which one it was, but I am privy to the current language.
Insider trading. That's what he meant.
And who's doing the insider trading?
He was saying in my example, I was like, you gotta, stand up for wrongdoings when you see it, whether you're on the same side or not. He was like, man, you gotta get that bag. I guess he was joking around about that. He was like, you gotta get that bag, man. You gotta do the insider trading. Hell no. I would never do insider trading. That is...
insider trading is a weird one. Like, I'm not condoning it, but at the same time, though, it's kind of odd, because if you just happen to, hear, some information or something like that from someone who's a quote-unquote insider, and then you act on that information, technically that's a crime, but also at the same time, it's like, if you just happen to hear something and you acted on it, Congress does it every day. I'm not getting political with that. It's done on all sides. Like, they do it every day, like some insider trading with stocks. How come it's not a problem when they do it, but it's a problem when the common man does it? I don't understand that.
Here's my thing with that. It is immoral on every level, and not to get political here, but I will say something. If I was in Congress, this would get shot down. I can promise you all this. And people would be like, he never kept up to his promise. I would try it. I would try and push forward a bill to ban insider trading in Congress. I would do that 100%. It is immoral, and it's gaming the system to one's advantage when other people do not have that advantage. It's an unfair advantage. And I think that insider trading should be completely banned for anyone involved in the U.S. government that may be privy to insider knowledge on ebbs and flows of the stock market or any kind of other financial institution where that knowledge would benefit them. I would 100% be behind that kind of a legislation being passed, because I think it is very immoral and questionable that people who are able to get that kind of insider knowledge, which gives them an upper hand advantage compared to other traders, can use that to their advantage, and there really isn't any questions asked about it on a congressional level, at least. Of course, when common folks do it, there is a great deal of questions brought up. Well, why did you do it? Isn't that wrong? But then we all know, no joke, we all know that there are people in both parties here in this country that are conducting insider trading right now. Right while we're talking right now, there is insider trading going on both parties, and they get away with it, and we all know about it. It's crazy, because one of the people here from Alabama is the second biggest insider trader behind the other person that's famous for it. He's from the other party than the other person. Many of y'all know the person I'm talking about, because they are specifically famous for insider trading. But he's gotten up there, and in just the past few years, he has ended up making millions on insider trading. That should entirely be illegal for a Congress member to do, and legislation should be passed specifically barring Congress members from being involved in that sort of insider trading. By
the way, it is illegal for the Congress people to insider trade. It's illegal for anybody to do that. But I think the only way to curb it is to pass legislation legislation preventing them from trading whatsoever while they're in Congress. Like, that's the only way to get around it, because it's already illegal to do that. Like, if they're caught insider trading, technically they're supposed to be prosecuted, but you'll never catch them being prosecuted because there's some political strings being pulled there. But they really can't do that. So it's already not allowed.
Yeah, but still, I think there should be a more stronger legislation brought forward specifically for the Congress to bar these sorts of things from happening. That was very poor wordage on my end, but I would still say that something has to be moved forward, like you're saying, where they cannot conduct any kind of trading at all while they're a Congress member. And if they find that to be an issue, maybe some compromise, considering that, you know, they're making millions on the stock market, is that congressional income for senators and representatives is bumped up a bit. As a compensation, I suppose, for them not robbing people blind in insider trading, maybe, you know, and a lot of people are going to be like, well, that sounds unfair. You know, you're pretty much just paying them to not cheat. But then at the same time, it's either that or they cheat and then they don't pass that bill. So I don't really know what the answer to that would be. We would have to see, like, in practice how that would turn out. But from what I understand, every single one of those bills that has been brought forward has been shot down almost unanimously because no one in Congress wants to stop insider trading, which is pretty messed up. But anyways, with that, I hope that talks about that fairly well, because I think that's something that everyone in the country can agree on, is that insider trading is not good and should come to an end. But anyways, moving on from that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to none other than SYI Tiger 907, who makes a return once again and puts in a $10 donation.
Hey!
And this is our viewer from Alaska.
The
And it's good to see
Frontier.
you once again. A Frontier. And they said, sup, happy Thanksgiving.
And a happy Thanksgiving to you, SYI Tiger, way out there in the frontiers of Alaska, off in the middle of nowhere, quite literally, keeping the lights on for folks all over the final frontier. And I gotta thank you so much for the support and wishing us a happy Thanksgiving. I hope you're gonna have that happy Thanksgiving wherever you may be, whether you're in Anchorage, Fairbanks, or in some far-flung corner of Alaska. I hope you have a great one as well. And I gotta thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it was not for folks like you, we would not be able to make this thing possible. And so with that, a huge thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Sergeant Sagi, who puts in a 9 and says 659 orc rubble for Turkey.
And thank you so much for the support. And that is very interesting to hear that that's how that many rubbles are for a turkey. That's very expensive turkey right there. I mean, not cheap, but still, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Stevie Aggie 1992, who puts in an $8 donation. And thank you very much, Stevie Aggie, for that support. He said, when the world was all still all right, and we all saw on our combat footage was the snack bar videos, that is.
And I gotta thank you for the support. And I guess the world was okay back then in some people's eyes. But you know, the world's always been a tumultuous place. Always has been. Always will be. A lot of folks don't remember the Cold War, because the Cold War for a lot of people is really just a distant memory. We're 40 years beyond the end of the Cold War, pretty much at this point. It's really crazy to think that, because most people who are alive these days, if you're an older person who's about 60, 70, or 80, you will remember the Cold War a bit, but you won't remember the entire thing and the nuclear threats that were looming over everyone every day. And it's really crazy to think that the world's always been in a tumultuous and uncertain place, but that's why you always have to find the beauty in it as well, because it's always going to be a fairly chaotic place. But still, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Plazoth, who puts in a 6. And thank you very much, Plazoth. They said a non-nuke fight between Russia and NATO, and what's it like?
A conventional war, it would be a slaughter, because the Russian Air Force is going to have to try and secure the skies above their forces. The Russians don't have any competent ground air defense, neither do they have a competent Air Force. The U.S. Air Force is the best trained and best equipped Air Force on the planet. The U.S. Army Air Defense Forces are some of the best trained and best equipped on the planet as well. It would be a no contest. We would dominate the skies over the Russian forces within the first few days. And then after that, you would see that the United States Armed Forces would be in a prolonged defensive effort just sitting there waiting, and the United States Air Force above them would be dominating the Russians and just obliterating them from the skies. This is largely how our doctrine has worked for decades now. Once we wipe away most of the major Russian resistance that could be seen, then we declare a ground offensive. The ground forces move forward, and they're pretty much mopping up whatever was left behind that the Air Force didn't consider important enough to kill. That would be how a conventional war would turn out. That's exactly how it happened in Iraq. And while a lot of people dunk on the Iraqis and they're like, they were never that good, they were never that great, the Iraqis are practically analogous to what the modern Russian army would look like if we were to fight it in a conflict today. And so for those reasons, we know that fighting the Russian Federation would look a lot and turn out a lot like it happened during the Gulf War in 1991. We would dominate those people. They would not stand a chance. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And also, we have important news from Matthew. It appears and it sounds as though Matthew is going to have to get some sleep. And Matthew, could you send me that little spreadsheet really quickly while you give your log off statement here?
Yes. And also, by the way, folks, sorry for getting off early tonight. I'm honestly feeling super exhausted for some reason. I'm not. Say what now?
Peckish even.
A peckish, I guess, is that even a word? But I'm feeling a little bit exhausted tonight, I'll be perfectly honest, and I would hold out until 12:30, but I don't think I can make it. And also, it might go beyond 12:30, actually, because there's actually 20 more Super Chats to go. So, sadly, I will have to get off early tonight. But once again, thank you all for another great stream. And also, everyone have a happy Thanksgiving tomorrow, because, of course, it is a Thanksgiving. Actually, it's already Thanksgiving, according to the time I'm looking at right here. So, be sure to have a happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see you once again on Friday for the short war video, and also that stream as well. And everybody, get some rest and enjoy your Thanksgiving. Get stuffed and be thankful. And let me send over that to the enforcer, by the way, because I'm having a hard time getting that email sent over. So let's see here. Let's see. I've sent it to the same email again. There we go. Send. And it should be sending over there. So take a look. And there's peckish. That's hungry. That's the wrong word.
Well, I mean, maybe you are hungry. I don't know. I was trying to give you the benefit of the doubt, man. Oh, man, I'm telling you. But beyond that, a big thanks for Matthew being here tonight. He's been feeling a little bit tired and exhausted before the stream. I was telling you, sometimes I feel like that too, and I just power through it most of the time. But it's rough whenever you feel that way. So good night to Matthew. Hopefully he gets a lot of sleep tonight, and he's ready for Thanksgiving tomorrow, and he gets all the turkey and gravy that one can desire. And so with that, a big good night to Enforcer Matt. A big good night to you, Matthew. It was great having you here tonight. We'll see you.
Good night to you all, and good night to the LSA.
And we'll see him on Friday. And that's a good night right there to Enforcer Matt. But nevertheless, y'all did see that peckish is a word, and it means hungry. But moving on from that, it is now time for us to continue on with our amazing questions that the amazing Lee Spring Army has thrown in. But still, I hope that does answer that question well. Please, thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And moving on from that, we have a 5 from John Ghana. And John Ghana said, hello, LSA, and hello to you, John Ghana. And I got to thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat from Andrew Honeycutt. And Andrew Honeycutt said, should NASA, the U.S. Air Force, and Space Force develop the Star Wars program from the 80s for real, and it would serve a dual purpose against asteroids and ICBMs? I'm not really sure if the technology is there yet. Maybe there in the next 10 years. But whenever we can get that kind of a program actually into the drawing board quite realistically with the technology available, I would say yes. It would be a major boon to U.S. Nuclear defense and would really give us an upper hand, at least on defending our space and skies from a Russian or Chinese nuclear threat, or even a rogue nation such as North Korea's and their nuclear threat. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one, which is a 5 from Swade's Lounge. And Lounge said, the devaluation of the Russian ruble against the dollar will have a minimal impact on day-to-day Russian lives. The Russian economy is insulated from it. Not necessarily so. The Russian economy really isn't insulated from rapid inflation, because what that is there, that's not just a devaluation of the ruble against the dollar, that's rapid hyperinflation happening inside of Russia. And that will start to have a direct impact on the daily lives of Russian Federation citizens, because their money is buying less goods. So for that reason, they will be suffering a little bit more. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And moving on from that, we have a 5 from Kachulian 343. And Kachulian said, I wonder if this massive casualty push is connected to the depression. It might be dual purpose of calling potential rebels angry about money like Kim. Maybe so. I'm not entirely sure on that one, though. It may just be that these mass casualty battles are happening just because the Russians are trying to get a lot of ground before the negotiations may be coming around in January or February, or it may be that they're seeing that the economy is about to implode, so they're trying to win the war before the economy implodes. Either way, that may be a reason, but I have a feeling that it may just be an act of desperation considering the time is running out for them. But with that, we are moving on to the next one, which is a 5 from Tommy Two Turns. And Tommy Two Turns said, what makes you believe that we don't have nuclear detection systems to cover the southern border of the continental United States? The United States government said that we don't, and they said that it was a massive failing and really put the Russians on a higher playing field, so we would have to either create a analogous system to the Russians that could fly over the South Pole, or we would have to create southern-facing nuclear detectors. Because throughout the entirety of history, the Russian Federation nor the United States has ever possessed ICBMs with enough range to be able to fire themselves over the South Pole and then back up towards the other. So for that reason, we've never, the Russians nor the United States, have ever really built nuclear detection systems that are supposed to be picking up nuclear weapons that are fired from that direction. The only country that really has that is kind of slightly Russia, but they only have it in the Russian Don region because they're wanting to keep an eye on Turkey and possible short-range nuclear weapons that could be fired from inside of Turkey that are operated by U.S. forces. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and I thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And also really quickly, I do thank you so much for the support, Resonance, in throwing in that $2.79 Canadian donation, but sadly, that question is political, and we cannot get into domestic political comments here because I cannot make a direct statement on whether I support or condemn the actions of the President of the United States or the President-elect of the United States of America. All I can say is that as an American citizen, understanding that both the President and the President-elect were elected by the will of the people and by the electoral vote, as it has been done for 250 years nearly inside this country, I have to assume that those people are the folks that have been chosen by the Republic to lead this nation for the next 4 years. And whatever actions they take must be the ones that the citizenry wants, and therefore they are the right actions by the large majority of the citizens of the United States until proven otherwise if they were to be voted out of office within the next 4 years. That is not the case, however, because the president-elect is going to be serving their second term and will not be able to serve a third term, and the current president of the United States was not able to run for a second term due to outside circumstances. But nevertheless, for those reasons, I will not be able to make a comment as to whether the citizens of the Republic believe that their actions were prudent or not, and that's also not really my position to gauge or judge the temperament of the Republic citizens and to say whether they really agree or disagree with any decision of the president or the president-elect. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Thank you once again for the support, though, and I hope that understands why we really can't answer that question. But with that, we are moving on to the next one, which is a 5 from Alan Doherty. And Alan Doherty did not throw in a comment, but I thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a 5 from Andrew Honeycutt. And Andrew Honeycutt said, is the next logical step for drones to be resupply mules, not putting people at risk to deliver ammo and med supplies? I've seen it happening already. And it really is. Drones are really the future for a lot of things in war at the moment. Infantry will never be replaced entirely by drones. The infantry will just be augmented by new forms of technological systems, but the infantry will never die. The infantry will always be around because there always has to be a man on the battlefield physically claiming ground. So for this reason, there may be less infantry of the future. They may be far more technologically advanced, but they will never be gone, truly. Just like fighter pilots will never really be gone either from the skies over our republic. They will never be gone. But beyond that, I would have to say, yes, they are going to be filling a lot of logistical roles, ammo mules, medical evacuations. Probably even in the future, they will automate supply trucks to where you do not have to have specific drivers, but the trucks are driverless and able to use maybe AI route pathing to figure out the most efficient and safe path to their waypoint destination further down the line. That may be the way things are done in the future, as that would greatly reduce the amount of unreliability within military logistical logistical components and help for a greater deal of efficiency in that regard. So I would have to say that probably is the way of the future, is that drones are going to start taking over a lot of actions and activities on the battlefield. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are moving on into the next one, which is a 5 from Sligo is the Sauce. And Sligo is the Sauce said, that's called English snow. Just 1 inch of that stuff can shut down the world. It's an English joke. Either you get it or you don't. That's honestly how it is in Alabama too. 1 inch of snow can fall and it's hell on earth down here. Like, no one knows how to handle snow. So I completely understand that. I get that even not being from Britain, and because it happens down here in the South as well. But still, thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a 5 from Matthew Jenkins. And I gotta thank you so much for the support, Matthew Jenkins. And Matthew said, can you please tell me how the big drones are programmed to hit their target? Shahed drone, for instance. Is it like Ronco, set it and forget, LSA? Actually, interestingly enough, the Shaheds are manually guided by an operator. That's why they have a camera system on board, so that way they can kind of eyeball their way to their target. That's kind of the interesting thing about it, which lets you know that these drones are being deliberately guided to their targets by some form of an operator. I believe that some variants of drones have been automated in the modern day, but it's a bit of a rough process because I don't think there's any terrain mapping features built into these drones. I think the computer systems for that would be too expansive in size, and so I don't think there's enough of them out there to really get an example of how those work yet. Most of them are guided by a human operator. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are moving on to the next one, which is a $50 super chat from Praise Adonai. And Praise Adonai said, Enforcers, Matt and Andrew, thanks for all you guys do. We appreciate it. And yee-haw-haw. And tell us what you think will happen in Ukraine during the next 4 months. Slava Ukraini. I'll be honest with you, Praise Adonai, I see the next 4 months of the war in Ukraine going about the same way it's going right now. I don't think the Russian economy is going to collapse tomorrow. It'll probably be a little ways down the road. It'll probably be into next year if it does. And also, I don't really see a lot of the frontline situations changing. I think they're going to remain stagnant. They've remained stagnant for so long, and no matter how hard the Ukrainians push or how hard the Russians push against the other, neither side can really uproot each other or push the other back. It's pretty much a dead-on stalemate down there at this point. And so for that reason, I think that the next 4 months are pretty much going to look very similar on a frontline standard to what they are right now. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. But still, thank you so much for the support, Praise that massive support and helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it was not for folks like you, we would not be able to make this thing possible. And so with that, we are on to the next one, which is a 5 from Leora Abigail. And Leora Abigail said, Happy Thanksgiving, Enforcers. Hope you have a great day with family and friends today. And thank you so much for the support, Leora Abigail. And we will have an amazing time with friends and family. It's always a fun time on Thanksgiving, and we cannot wait to have an absolutely amazing and fun time this Thanksgiving. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is another 5 from Tommy Two Turn without a comment. Hey, and thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And we also have another 5 from Eternal Core. And Eternal Core said, told you that it's your MacBook. Now if you redo your MacBook from factory, it might fix it. But you'll lose everything unless you back up your files. And I don't know what Matthew's input on that would be, because that was a comment from Matthew and he's already off for the night. But I do thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I will run that by Matthew because I think he's getting fed up with the Macs. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a 2 from Turbo Focus 915. And Turbo Focus said, wishing happy Thanksgiving to the USA Armed Forces. And thank you so much for the support and wishing them a happy Thanksgiving, because there's a lot of people in the U.S. Armed Forces who will not really be able to enjoy the Thanksgiving because they will still be on active duty stations or different kinds of assignments. And I got to thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it was not for folks like you, we would not be able to make this thing possible, so that way they could hear that from someone as nice as you, Turbo Focus. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. And moving on from that and into the next one, we heard that Uncle Sam's misguided child said, I'm here for the turkey giveaway and Allen 2028. And hey, I wish we were giving away a turkey. That would be really cool, honestly. And so with that, Thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $2 super chat from Andrew Honeycutt. And Andrew Honeycutt said, who wants an LSA logo t-shirt or hoodie? LSA, I do. And you know what, Andrew Honeycutt? We need to get some merch back out there. We don't know when we're going to do that. We're still trying to figure that out in the background, but we should be putting some more out hopefully soon at some point. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a 2 from Dottie. And Dottie said, you guys rock. And thank you so much for the support, Dottie. And you rock for supporting this channel and helping us to make this thing possible. If it wasn't for folks like you, we would never have been able to make this thing possible. We would have never been able to make it a reality. And we would never have been able to be here tonight. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is the 2 from Andrew Honeycutt. And Andrew Honeycutt said, not everyone in Russia is a vatnik, right? And that's true. Not everyone in Russia is a vatnik. There are some pretty okay people in Russia, much like there is in any country, but the Russian Federation's government and a lot of the people are supporting this conflict, so a decent amount of them, you could say they are vatniks or something along those lines. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is Uncle Sam's misguided child, who threw in a 2 and said prayers for Ukraine tonight, and Ukraine, United States, and Illinois, and put in a little clinking of the beers, a little cheers in there. And yeah, thank you so much for the support. And hopefully Ukraine will fare through this air attack that's happening tonight well. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a 2 from Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee said, now Thanksgiving, E.T., thankful, not Russian, and LSA. And thank you so much for the support, Bruce Lee. And I guess that is something to be thankful for, is that you're not a Russian and conscripted to frontline fighting. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the last super chat of this segment, which goes to Elka Sir. And Elka Sir said, which non-US roundel do you think looks top tier? Why, Elka Sir, that's a silly question. It would be the Royal Air Force. I mean, there's just no one else that even gets close. It is the Royal Air Force. This is probably the most famous roundel in the history of the world right there. Or this one. Actually, the modern one, I have to say, in my opinion, the modern one is as sick as the traditional one. But the traditional one, it just goes hard. It's like I just don't think there's a roundel that really beats this one outside of the U.S. Air Force roundel. I've absolutely loved the RAF's roundels and insignia for an incredibly long time. I think that their fin flashes as well are also really cool looking, both the old and the modern. And also their logo is incredibly cool looking as well. I mean, I would have to say, in my opinion, I would have to be honest with y'all folks. I'm a bit of an Anglophile when it comes down to it. I like British stuff. And so when it comes down to it, my second favorite thing in the world outside of American stuff is always going to be British stuff. So you ask me, what's your favorite Navy outside of the U.S. Navy? I would say it's the Royal Navy. If you ask me, what's my favorite Army outside of the American Army? I would say it's the British Army. If you ask me, what's my favorite Air Force outside of the U.S. Air Force? It would be the Royal Air Force, the Royal Marines. Really anything from Britain, I'm always generally pretty happy with it, especially the deep-rooted traditions that they have and also the amazing legends that have been created out of their armed forces. It's truly an incredible thing. And so that would be my favorite roundel outside of the U.S. Air Force's roundel would be the RAF, because Britain and America, while America broke away from Britain, ever since then, Britain and America have always been very, very close. And it's for a specific reason. It's because the United Kingdom and the United States share an incredibly great deal in common. In fact, we actually share pretty much everything in common. The only thing that we did not share in common is that the U.S. colonies did not like to be taxed without any form of representation inside of the British Parliament. And that's the only thing that we disagreed on. But beyond that, Britain and America are pretty much the same in almost every single respect with the kind of ideas it has of democratic and liberty-loving sorts of values. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, and I hope that also lets a lot of British people know where my favorite is. Like, if I had a favorite child of a nation out there in the world, it would be the UK, if it was any of them. Of course, I'm an American, and I love the United States, and the United States is always first and foremost in my mind, but if there was any country out there that comes a very close second, it would be the UK. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, and thank you so much for a very good question, Alcacer, and helping this channel to keep keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. And we actually have another super chat, a 7 Canadian from Resonance, who threw in their 5th super chat. And Resonance said, how possible do you think that U.S. NATO forces may be hiding some kind of a classified anti-nuclear weapon? And apologies for the last question, by the way. And no problems at all. I just had to address it, because I don't want people to misconstrue that we may make a political statement. We never want to do that, but that's totally fine. It was 100% just something that was accidentally done, and I thank you so much for apologizing for it, because we always avoid political stuff as much as we can. Y'all would not believe how much we do that in the background to make sure that we keep a unified message and in a purpose on the channel that doesn't get involved in that sort of a deal. But I would have to say the chances of us hiding a weapon system like that is next to none. Pretty much most weapon systems are known about publicly. Very few of them are not, and if they are not known publicly, they are very niche and not mass-produced on a wide scale. The THAAD is probably the best thing that we have, or the Aegis Ashore. The Aegis Ashore and the THAAD are really the most modern kind of anti-nuclear defense systems that we have that could be called that, but we publicly know about those because they're very hard to hide. In fact, they're impossible to hide because they're mass-produced. Just random folks are issued these weapon systems, and it's nothing that really can be hidden easily. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, and I thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. But with that, it is now time for us to move on from the Super Chat segment and on into the live chats. As many of y'all may know, we are starting to run overtime again, much like we do every single night. And so for this reason, we will only be able to grab the Morse code decoders of the stream and 3 live chat questions before we round her out. And the Morse code decoders are Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, Kevin J, Paul Schultz, David Millsaps, her roll fluffiness, and Arbel Garbo. And the Morse code says, the ruble turning into rubble is what the Russian army also did, turning into rubbish and all. And long live the Lee Spring Army. And that is the sound of money, and y'all got it dead on the nail. That was the Morse code message of the night. I got to congratulate y'all so much for supporting this Morse code message deciphering and getting it correct again, while I was about to go into a Pavlov effect of just repeating the same thing over and over. Y'all are absolutely impressive with getting that done every single day, and I got to congratulate y'all for doing that on the 1008th night. Y'all never get it wrong, and that is highly commendable. And so I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next Super Chat, because we actually had the last Super Chat a second ago, but we actually have another one. And this one goes to Eddie, the press. And let me make sure that I'm getting the whole name here, because it has a ... behind it. So let me make sure that I'm getting that correct. Hang on. Eddie, the press escape Darnell. And Eddie threw in his first Super Chat ever. Hey! And 1 second, sorry, the control room just died. I don't know why, but let me see here. Here we go. And Eddie said, I found you back in August. I worked night shift in Australia, so I sleep while you were alive. I have woken up just to tell you guys what you were doing is amazing, especially how you both are so passionate. And good night. And good night to you, Eddie. That was an incredibly kind message of you to throw in. Just waking up in the middle of our stream being live, but that is totally understandable. And you got to get a lot of sleep, especially when you're working on the night shift. The night shift is always rough. We run night shifts over here in America every single day, so I completely understand what you mean. But nevertheless, I thank you so much for saying that the channel is awesome and supporting it and helping it to keep on running. That is incredibly nice of you to go out of your way to try and hop on a live stream so that way you can super chat and say kind words like that. That means a great deal to both Matthew and me, and I know Matthew would love to have heard that if he was on air right now too. Folks like you and y'all's kindness, forgetting the super chat and everything else, just forgetting all of that and talking about what you said right there. Y'all are the kind of folks that give us the inspiration to keep this thing running. It isn't always a cakewalk to keep this thing running. We try and make it look like that publicly, but there's always things that go on in the background that make this channel very difficult to run on a daily basis, or sometimes there are entirely different things that come up from running this channel that make it, in some forms, a living hell. No joke. I don't mean to say that in a bad way. It has nothing to do with any of y'all. It's just external things that go on behind the scenes. But nevertheless, folks like you give Matthew and me the inspiration and the encouragement to weather it all, weather the storm, and get on here each and every day and cover this news for all of y'all. It is a very important and a very honorable position that we have to be able to cover news for folks like you. Not because the news we cover is important, not because we think we're important, but it's because I think y'all are important. Y'all are the people who really give this channel a lot of its purpose and meaning and a lot of its value, at least in my mind, and folks like you really help to cement that in my mind, Eddie. And so a huge thanks to you so much once again for those kind words and that support and helping us to keep this thing running. And also, Eddie threw in a $8 super chat and said, also, Andrew should try another program to screen share, might fix your lag. We would love to try, and we have tried that before. It's just that there are no competitors that do that well with that, sadly. Like, we've actually tried in the background and we gave up on all of them, but still, thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it was not for folks like you, we would not be able to make this thing possible and keep it running. But nevertheless, folks like you have helped to make this thing possible for 1,008 days and will continue to make it possible well on into the future. Futures untold and futures unknown, but still, thank you so much once again. And with that, it is time for us to move on into the third to last question of the night, which goes to Marion. And Marion said, why doesn't NATO accept Ukraine since Putin technically isn't at war and he calls it a special military operation? Well, regardless whether he says it's a special military operation or not, it is a war. And a country that is involved in an active armed conflict, which Ukraine is in, whether it's called a war or not, is a reason why Ukraine cannot join. Also, NATO has some corruption issues that they're concerned about in Ukraine, at least according to their public statements that we have to take at face value, that they want Ukraine to fix before they can join NATO. So those are largely the reasons why. Good question, though, because, you know, if we're wanting to play word games with the Russians, that is 100% a thing we could do. But at the same time, NATO is a little bit more clear. It's not really a war per se, but more so an armed conflict of any type. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Good question, though. And with that, we are moving on to the second to last question of the night, which goes to Avari Mandabratis. And Avari Mandabratis said, what other countries have based their currency on the Russian ruble? How have they been affected? I can't think of any that base their currency on the Russian ruble. The ruble is a worthless currency, really, to anyone in the world. And I would bet that they would rather trade on the Japanese yen before they ever traded on the Russian ruble, because the Japanese yen actually has a major economy backing it. The Russian Federation's ruble has no major economy backing it. So I don't think there's any countries that base their currency on the Russian ruble. And let me go pull that up. Let's see here. Countries that have the Russian ruble as a reserve currency. Well, let's see if we can find something on that. So according to what I've found, no country has pegged its currency to the ruble because it's too unstable and poorly managed. And that was from 2009. So let's see. Yep, there is literally no country in the world that has attached their currency to the ruble. So there's no way to know, because there's no other country that is stupid enough to do that. So, like, crazily enough, Avari. So it looks like everyone is smart enough to know not to use the ruble. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Thank you so much for a good question, Avari. And moving on to our final question of the night, this one goes to Dora. And Dora asked, lately, quite a few military YouTubers have been releasing videos regarding what would happen if Russia launches a nuke on Ukraine or NATO. What's your opinion on what NATO will do? First off, a lot of those people are trying to fearmonger, because while we talk about the possibility of a nuclear exchange in this channel, we always want to make sure that we put it out there that it's a diplomatic tool and probably will never happen, and the chances of it are very slim, if not impossible. However, if a nuclear conflict was to happen, like, and this is the thing why, like, not to get into an extremely long explanation here, because we are starting to run overtime, and I don't want to run too overtime here. Not that, like, you know, like, I get paid massive overtime or something if we go overtime. It's just that we want to get some sleep and stuff. But beyond that, there's no way for the Russians to justify firing a nuke at Ukraine yet, because they're not threatening the existential, well, they're not giving an existential threat to the state of the Russian Federation for them to be able to do something like that. And not only that, NATO really isn't either. And Russia's nuclear doctrine, while modified, is still a defensive doctrine. It's not a preemptive strike doctrine. So there's no way for them to do that. There's no way for us to nuke them, because everyone's nuclear doctrine in NATO, Britain, France, and the United States, are all defensive in form. So there's really no way for us to conduct a preemptive nuclear strike. So if I had to cut it down in a really short explanation, The way that a nuclear strike would happen, Ukraine, well, no, actually, Russia gets into conventional war with NATO. We steamroll them. We're racing towards St. Petersburg and Moscow. They start dropping tactical nuclear weapons on our forces. We start dropping tactical nuclear weapons on theirs. Most of those forces are wiped out. We're still winning. We're still pushing forward. And then the Russians fire a strategic nuclear exchange. And that's really the only way that it could happen at this point. And beyond that, it would be highly unlikely. And we're not even close to a conventional war beginning in between Russia and NATO from what we know. NATO is preparing for one, but we haven't really heard enough to know that, oh yeah, it's going to happen and go down here in the next week or two. So it's really impossible, at least given the certain circumstances that we're seeing now. There would have to be a lot of things, major things that would have to happen before we got to that point. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And we have actually reached the end of tonight's stream, which is absolutely crazy to think. And I got to thank everyone who's been here tonight, all 87,000 people who have watched this stream from the beginning, on the 12.1 thousand people who were here at the peak. I've got to thank you all for being here with us on our last stream before Thanksgiving. Of course, we will not be running a stream tomorrow live, as we will be celebrating Thanksgiving, but we will be back on the next day, on the 29th of November at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, to cover the next 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine and news from around the world. It is, of course, incredible to know that folks like all of y'all enjoy this channel, and we always take that to be a high honor and a high praise that so many of y'all choose this channel to be your primary source of news. We are always so happy to know that many of y'all are enjoying this channel, because we enjoy having each and every single one of y'all here with us each and every single night. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Leaf Spring Army. The Leaf Spring Army will never die, and we will see you all on Friday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Good night, and take care.
Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Just